I believe that I saw a creature as an early teenager that simply defies the natural bindings of this very world. I don't want you to write me off as a nut, but I believe it was a chupacabra, based off the couple few times I had seen it. I grew up with my parents owning lots of livestock, and we would find cattle, goats, chickens, all dead. This didn't happen though until one hot summer, about late July actually, when all of a sudden we started finding them dead constantly. It was the way in which they all died what bothered me so much. My parents too. These animals weren't killed by coyotes or even mountain lions like many would speculate. In fact, they weren't even eaten on. They had their blood drained from their bodies entirely. Every single one. Everyone we found, it was the same situation on repeat. They had their blood drained, their entire body. We were at a loss for what to make out of it. My parents were poor. They both grew up poor, and they had little education, so raising and selling livestock was how they made a living. It set us back a lot in that time, and it seems like every other day we were having a chicken drop off dead, or a goat that would be found dead. The first time that we found any dead, it happened to be a pair of goats that my parents owned and were getting ready to sell to a couple of my parents' business partners. They were going to purchase them and expand on their goat milk production, or so I was told. At the time of this particular event, I was probably about 13. They found them the very next morning, outside their goat pen, dead. 2 huge holes in their neck, in the same spot on both animals. Blood drained completely from their bodies, with no markings or anything else on their bodies. There were no signs of a fight or any sort of struggle. From the looks of it, these goats had literally just laid down on their side and extended their necks and just perished. It was shortly after that that we started finding chickens dead in the same way, and even a few cattle here and there, all having the same 2 large puncture holes in their neck, until one night, in about mid to late August, we saw the culprit for the first time. My father began pulling the animals closer to the house, considering this worked at nighttime, and he would stay up, waiting for whatever it was to show up. And it did, when he gave it enough time to show itself. The best way I can tell it to you is it's probably about 4 feet tall, with a really large head and huge black eyes. Its mouth was chocked full of razor teeth, and I remember it having 2 large vampire-like fangs. It was hunched over, kind of like an old woman, with tiny hands but large claws that seemed to not even fit on the hands. The creature was simply hideous looking, and looked like it was out of a horror movie, or even a science fiction movie. It's like an experiment that was gone wrong. If I had to try and piece together in the animal kingdom, I would say it kind of reminded me of a tiny human, mixed with a naked mole rat, mixed with a gray alien. That description does it piss poor justice, but I'm trying to give you somewhat of an idea, because there's not really an accurate picture of a representation of this thing. If this is truly what a chupacabra is, then they are far more elusive and dangerous than we previously thought. At the time, I didn't know this was a chupacabra. I just thought it was some sort of creature that was preying on our livestock. Every night, it would just keep coming back for more and more and more. My father had shot at it multiple times, swearing, doing everything he could to try and block it off, but it just kept coming back. There were even times where I swear he hit it right in the back of the head with his gun, but it didn't even budge. It would just run off. When it would run, I remember it running on all 4s, but when it would stand or walk around, it was only on 2. The thing was freaky looking. That's all I remember. Being 13, I don't have as many memories as I wish I would of it. Or maybe I don't wish. Things got so serious to the point to where my father worked some sort of deal out with some men who were apparently a part of the mafia or cartel or some gang, because at nighttime, he would get 3 to 4 armed guards walking around the premises. It scared me and my mother. Not only was this creature a reoccurring visitor, but now we had cartel men with guns around the perimeter. My father didn't have any money, and I didn't feel like he was in any position to be gambling with men like that. For all I know, he probably put my mother and I up as collateral in case he couldn't pay them. Which, by the way, I don't know how he ever hired them in the first place. The only thing I really knew is that he had friends in higher places, but to the extent of that, I was never sure. My dad was kind of a man who was always incognito, especially with his friend circle. After a month or two, the sightings ceased, and the men stopped coming around, so I want to say it was only maybe 6 weeks really that this happened. Life ended up going back to normal after some time, and fast forward, I eventually moved away for college and moved out of the state. My parents still live there though, and they're still doing the whole livestock thing and selling it. My dad doesn't outright talk about it, and I haven't asked about it in a long time, but it has probably been left for good, or so I hope. So, I'm emailing you because I got some crazy stuff to talk to you about. Part of my family owns a ranch, and they're selling it and moving out here to the east to start over. Why is that a big deal? Because they've had that ranch for over 20 years, and you'll never believe what is going on over there. They're finding their animals dead, with the blood sucked out of their necks. I kid you not. They are panicked so much that they're moving their operations from West Texas to out here in New York State. I don't know what kind of animals they had or what animals they raised, but I know they had lost over 17 of their horses from this same creature. My uncle, who is a firm believer in Bigfoot, considering that he's had 3 to 4 accounts of his own which are terrifying, I'll have to get him to send you his stories. He's seen this creature, and luckily for him, he's a huge cryptozoology guy, so he knows firsthand what he's dealing with. He knows that this is a chupacabra, based on what he has seen himself and the research he has done in the past. He has tried killing this thing with traps, bullets, you name it. Nothing seems to stop it. It's already claimed over 17 of their horses, as I just told you, and this creature is getting more and more hostile, venturing further and closer to his family. He was very prideful at first, claiming he wasn't going to let it take over. But after losing so many and risking so much, he's now really starting to see the big picture, rethinking the safety of his family. I wish I had more to include for you, but it's the only thing I know, and he's the only person I know that's actually dealing with a first-hand account of a real-life chupacabra. This occurred last month. In the midst of all the quarantine craziness, I saw a very bizarre creature that I never would have imagined seeing in my life. This was in a rather secluded hunting area in thick, piney woods. This was around the Sam Rayburn Lake in Texas. I rightfully decided to take some time to hike around because I was just getting far too stir crazy, being at home with COVID and everything. I had full plan to set up a tent and everything after the sun had gone down. It wasn't totally pitch black yet, but it was getting there. Light and visibility had gotten far more poor, and that's when I began to hear something around me. Poking its head out from the thicker brush, about 50 feet away, was a face that I couldn't quite discern right away, but then realized quickly that it was not human. It had very large black eyes, and then it opened its mouth and revealed its sharp teeth and what appeared to be oversized canine fangs. That's when it jumped out of the brush on all fours and took off in the opposite direction. I only saw the body momentarily, but it was weird looking. It had a large alien head, because that's what came to mind at the time, but the body was like that of a hairless cat. By the way, if you have ever seen that breed of cat, they're hideous, at least in my opinion. The body reminded me of a cat. Even the way it moved was very feline-like, but again, no hair. It had dark gray mangy skin. It was hard to get a vivid and full accurate details of everything on this thing, because it was so quick. It was there and then it wasn't. But I did see its face without a doubt. enough time that I could remember the important details. It started off with me feeling watched before it ever stuck its head out, so I'm assuming that it was walking to the area and happened to watch me before it ever revealed itself. I don't know if its intent was to reveal itself to me, or if I just happened to be looking and scouting and then seeing its face peering at me through the brush. While I was shaking momentarily because I had no idea what it was that I had just encountered, it didn't veer me away from leaving. I left the next day with plenty of time to go over the scenario in my head and what I saw. I do believe that what I saw was a creature I've never seen before, and I'm terrible at making up stories, so this is my actual account of what happened. You seem to be the expert on creatures that are in the unknown category, so I'll let you explain to me what it is I saw. I saw something that really alarmed me on the night of October 16th, 2016. It looked like a dog or a wolf. It was on its hind legs, kind of leaning up against a tree. When I saw it, it had stepped over a 4-foot barbed wire fence with incredible ease, and then quickly put itself up against the tree as to stay hidden and remained out of view. But I got a good look at it. This thing was busted. I saw it. It had pointed ears, dark in color, and was the overall shape of a werewolf. I got a good look at it for about 2 minutes until it climbed up into the tree. Then it leapt right out of the tree and ran off. I had just stepped outside to go chop up some firewood and get some kindling when that was outside waiting for me. I must have startled it, which is why it tried to hide itself. At the time, I had no idea what I was looking at, but it didn't feel right. I knew right away from the look of it that it was not a natural creature of this very world. I know that whatever I saw scared me so badly that I stayed inside up all night. Then, a couple of weeks later, I went on vacation with my family at the Gulliver Lake in Michigan. It's in the Upper Peninsula. I and my brother would usually take a walk after dinner time. We came across a pond that was very thick with berries and bramble. We stopped to look at them for a while, and then decided to go walk back shortly thereafter. As we're headed back to the house, we saw a very large man-like thing standing under a tree. I thought it was a bear standing on its hind legs at first, but this was much larger. It had what appeared to be a large snout on its face, hence why I thought it was a bear at first. We just left the area shortly after that. My brother and I had zero plans to stick around to see what would happen. Over the course of my time in the state of Michigan, I had witnessed 2 different types of dogmen, a creature I had heard so much about living in the state, and which I never saw until the year of 2016. In a 3-week time span, I saw 2 different variants of the same creature. At the time, I didn't even know there was such a thing as Dogman Variants, but after listening to Vic Cundev's Dogman Encounter show, that's where I learned that there are different types. I'm thankful that in both situations these creatures never seemed to notice my presence, because had they did, who knows if they would have tried to strike. I have never felt fear in my life had I been around these 2 kinds of creatures. Hello, fellow cryptozoologist. I wanted to share with you my experience, my very own Dogman encounter from late last summer in 2019. I was visiting the Cumberland Falls Recreation Area in Kentucky. At the time, I was with this girl that was my girlfriend on and off for the remainder of the year. We broke up indefinitely in November, but that's not relevant to the story. At the time, briefly, we were dating on and off. It was during our time here together that we saw one of these creatures. It was very muscular and very dark, so dark that it stood out clear and plain as day. We were in total awe at what we saw. It was walking by the Cumberland River, and we just happened to catch a glimpse of it in the daylight. That's about it for this encounter. Just wanted to share with you that these things are indeed real, and we need to be aware of our surroundings, regardless whether out in town or out in the woods. mid-September 2005, July 20th, 2015, and February 21st, 2017. I have had 3 different encounters with 3 different creatures. Maybe they were all the same creature. I know what I saw. When I was younger, I saw what looked to be a big German shepherd on its hind legs, running through a very thick patch of woods. It only happened for a second, but I very much remember the long muzzle and pointed ears distinctly. That sight will never leave my head. It was chasing a big buck that had just ran through the same area only moments before. And when the buck ran through, I could tell it wasn't just running, but running from something. I had no idea that is what I would have seen next. The second encounter was more exciting, at least from a reader's perspective. It was later in the evening, and we were having a small family party/barbecue miles outside of town in an area in Pennsylvania, about 63 miles away from the state border. I had just walked away to the far side of the lot to go pee in the trees because the only bathroom at the time was being remodeled, and you bet yourself I wasn't about to go and use the porta potty. Those things are so nasty, and everybody had been blowing that thing up all day at the barbecue. Thanks, but I'll take my chances in the trees. Just as I was stepping away from the tree line, I heard some branches nearby moving. I turned to see what it was, and I flinched immediately at what I saw. The first thing I noticed was a long muzzle. Do you know what it's like when your eyes see something shocking? It will be like you noticed one detail, and then your eyes slowly trail off to the full thing. That's exactly what happened in this case. I was seeing before me a creature about 7 feet tall, full-figured. This thing was not any further away than 20 feet to maybe 30 feet right there in the trees, staring me down as if I was some injured deer ready to be pounced upon and devoured whole. It would appear to be blackish long fur and a big mane, kind of like how a lion has. The face reminded me of something you would see in a movie. It resembled a human, but it also resembled a wolf. It was very humanistic, especially the cheekbones and how it showed its expression, and the expression on its face was angry. It was using both of its hands to hold onto the trees next to it, as if to pull the trees apart so it could fully see me, and I it. It was the scariest looking thing I've ever seen. It had huge teeth sticking out of its mouth with exaggerated canines. The second we made eye contact, it made an even angrier expression, and then let out a nasty snarl of disapproval. I felt all the blood drain from my body, and I ran cold, even though it was easily 85 to 90 degrees outside. The barbecue we were having, which wasn't too far away, had some music playing through one of those new music boombox devices. If you've never seen one of these semi-large cylindrical speakers that are amazing, they can get pretty loud. We bought ours at Costco, and other places sell them too, but anyway, that had started to play loud music. So this creature looks over in that direction as the music begins playing. Then it looks back at me and slowly backs away into the forest without ever breaking eye contact, not even for a second. But it starts backing away in the direction headed towards where the barbecue area is. Once it fully immersed itself back into the tree line and I couldn't see it anymore, I took off running back towards where the barbecue is being held. One of my friends, one of the ones I invited, made a joke saying, "What's wrong? Did you see a ghost?" Ha ha ha. That's when my family began to notice I was paler than a corpse and was full of anxiety as I was scanning the woods all around us. They thought I was having some sort of schizophrenic episode, even though I'm not schizophrenic at all. My other friends said, "Man, you don't look so good. Why don't you just sit down, relax, have a beer?" He sat me down, handed me a beer, and so I sat there for 20 minutes, not saying a word, full of anxiety, and continuously scanning the wood line meticulously. I was waiting for that thing to appear, or to somewhere along the way pop its head out and show itself, so that way everybody could see it, knowing that it was watching me still. But it never did. I wish I could tell you that this thing came out and charged at us, or something crazy, but That was the end of that encounter, and I never saw it again after that. The last time I would see this thing would have been in the winter of 2017. I don't know if it was the same creature, but it looked very similar. I saw this creature on a Sunday night. After seeing it previous times, I wasn't about to let this thing get to me. Not again. I kept a small pistol on me at all times, and I actually did not have a permit to carry, so shh. I ended up shooting at it a few times, and I screamed something horrible, and it ran off. I'm pretty sure I hit it a few times because I'm not a terrible shot, but it was just a crappy 9mm, and I didn't expect to do any damage with it. I know that a creature of this size and intelligence would only be annoyed by such a tiny, minute weapon. So get this, the thing came back and popped every tire on my tiny car. I woke up around 2:30 in the morning to 4 loud pops, like somebody taking a Bowie knife and jabbing it into each tire. After the 2 pops, I jumped up out of bed, thinking, what is going on? Because I didn't realize the popping sounds I heard were the tires. I jumped to look out my window, and I see that large creature again, what appeared to be biting each tire, and then fleeing. So I ran outside. It's freezing cold, it's winter, I'm in my boxers and a shirt, and I start firing in the air, screaming at it to show itself, because I wasn't about to sit there and let it do whatever it wanted to do. I was going to put a few bullets in its head. It had ran off, but I seriously think that this thing was so intelligent that it came back for revenge and decided to pop my tires with its teeth. Ever since I had my last encounter at that barbecue, it has not left me alone, and it's been bothering me since. It's almost like I've been targeted, and that's the most accurate way I can describe it. I got to the point to where I was sick of it. I regret not having any larger weapons or anything with me, like anything crazy, but I felt like even a 9mm is enough, at least to give it a warning, if not to piss it off more, which is what I probably did. I've been living out here in rural Mississippi for the past 6 years now, and it's pretty common to hear a variety of different animal noises. Still, I can never pinpoint an animal to the sound that I've been listening to lately. It's pretty common to hear coyotes like that all the time, and my partner wants to say that this was a coyote, but let's be honest. A coyote doesn't sound like a dinosaur screaming. I only hear the sound at night, but it seems like I'm living in Jurassic Park. If you ever have seen the movie Jurassic Park, there are multiple times throughout each film where a dinosaur roars or makes a noise, and it just has this reptilian sound to it, where if you are blindfolded, and even though the T-Rex sound, for example, is made up of a few different tones, if you've ever watched a documentary on the making of it, it still sounds like it's coming from a large reptile or a dinosaur. I'm telling you this and including this in my email because that's the only way I can accurately describe and explain how this sounds. It sounds nothing like a coyote, and my partner seems to want to disagree with me. I don't know if it's because he's scared or what the deal is. It does not sound natural, and it is not anything that I've ever heard before. We live close to a rather large part of swampland, so already that's a strike against us. I've listened to all sorts of weird horror stories about people getting lost in the swamps and all the monsters that are supposed to be living in the swamp. Quote unquote monsters. And then I start hearing this at night. I don't believe monsters are real necessarily. I think I'm probably just hearing an unidentified animal, in my honest opinion. Still, scientifically, I've never heard any animal sound as loud as this, or matching this exact animal's timbre. I don't know how much you know about giant reptiles that live in swamps, but it almost has this hissing quality. As I'm typing this to you, I'm trying to sit here and think of what animal I can explain to you that would make the most sense. If you've ever heard a Komodo dragon, for example, they have this deep roar, angry groan, hiss sound. That's not quite what I'm hearing, but imagine that amplified, with more of a roar, guttural quality behind it. Now you're starting to get close to what I'm hearing. Again, a reptile sounds like a reptile. and there's no mistaking that. I'm sorry if this email is too long. It's just been really scaring me lately. So I thought I would reach out to several different big YouTubers, because with all these stories you guys get sent, I'm sure you get knowledge and are able to clarify some things that might be out there or possibly be unknown to man. A couple of years ago, some friends that we've made since moving up here told us about some Bigfoot encounters they've been having in the same area. Now, I'm not a believer in Bigfoot by any means, but their encounters and sightings were frightening with how they'd retell their stories. I guess Bigfoots run rampant out here, but I didn't know that before moving out here. I thought to myself that it could be a Bigfoot that I'm hearing out here in the swamps at night, but from what I've been told, and from what little I know about Bigfoot in general, they don't sound reptilian. Maybe they do. Hopefully you can answer me and reply. Perhaps it's an entirely new discovered species of animal that's only living here in the Mississippi swampland. I have held on to this encounter for a very long time, and I haven't told anybody about it because I fear I would be mocked and called crazy. But maybe it's about time for me to finally share my experience with the world. After listening to all the stories people have shared with you, it's really encouraged me to step up and share what happened to me back in the late summer of 1979 in Columbus, Mississippi. Your video series about reptilians is precisely what I wanted to talk about. Until recently, the past 6 months, I had no idea that there was anybody else out there who has seen a creature like I have. People talk about Bigfoot, and even I've heard about a thing called a Mothman, but I never would have guessed that other people have seen large reptilian humanoid creatures just like I did. I thought I was crazy because I thought I was the only one. I've never been into conspiracies or wanting to dive down that rabbit hole, but the more I listen to some of these stories, the more real this all makes it seem, and the more it all brings me back to that evening. I could tell you, it was July 10th in 1979, and it was beginning to get dusk. I lived out of a small house that I was rooming with a few friends. I'd only been there for around a few months, and by nature, I'm a small town boy from Colorado. So a few friends of mine moved out here to start up a small business, and they really wanted me on the team to work in their department. I didn't have a job at the time, so I thought it would have been the perfect fit. Rooming with some friends, working at the same position. We could party and work together. What more of a life could you want at only 22 years old? Now, you need to understand something. At the time where I was living, it wasn't fully developed like everything is nowadays with stores and businesses everywhere. Commercial real estate in general has very much expanded in just about every area. Back then, this was about as rural as you can get, with only a few plots of land here and there, and with houses sparsely spread. At the time, there was only a few other houses in the area, with mainly large empty fields and thick woods all around. You bet it was humid as hell. Our drive to work was approximately 25 minutes, which we enjoyed, because that means we could party and be as loud as we want to, without having angry neighbors calling the police on us. In fact, that's actually one of the reasons why we decided to go in and rent this house together. If you look out from the front door, it goes out all the way to the front road, and beyond that, it dips down in a small embankment to a thick grassy field that goes on for acres and acres into more and more denser woods. You can call it an empty meadow, because the only thing that's really there is probably some marshland and some really, really tall grass. At the time, there was zero development, and the closest house is probably a half-mile down the road in either direction. Again, perfect for young kids in early 20s to party without disturbing anybody purposefully. And might I say that at that age, I drank like a pirate. At the time of the sighting, though, I was stone cold sober, and I really want to hone in on that. I was the only one home at the time, because my few other roommates were out doing something, I don't remember what. Probably out chasing girls like they always did when they weren't working. I was usually the more reserved one. I was outside having a cigarette, and I see this giant lizard stand up from the tall grass in the field opposite of the side of the house. I stared at it intently for a few seconds, just trying to comprehend what I was looking at. Then, it turned its head, and its whole body followed. It slowly began walking towards the woodline, which was probably about a few hundred yards. I watched this thing walk all the way towards the woodline before finally entering and disappearing. This thing looked like a Komodo dragon crossed with a human. It was dark and scaly looking and had long arms. It did have a tail, but because the grass was so tall, its lower body was obscured. I almost dropped my cigarette and thought to myself I'd just seen a lizard man. When I was outside smoking my cigarette and happened to see it, I wasn't necessarily looking for anything. I was just kind of spacing out, looking off in the distance, thinking about my day, when this thing rises up out of the tall grass. It was tall though, because that grass is easily 3 feet tall, and it only came up to about mid-thigh to this creature. That meant that it was probably around 7 to 8 feet tall, and it had a massive reptile head. I don't know if it actually saw me, or didn't, and just chose to ignore me, but it never looked over at me, and it's not like I was obscured by any trees or bushes. I was out there in the open, this small, tiny, skinny guy. We don't have any trees anywhere on the house of the yard, so I was sticking out if it would have looked over. I don't know if it was hunting or what it was doing, but it was obviously there before I even came out with a cigarette, crouching down in the grass. I was out there for probably 5 to 7 minutes before I saw this thing stand up and walk off. When it walked, it was just like a human. It had a very natural glide with long strides. It was incredibly muscly, and there wasn't, or at least looked to be, an ounce of fat on that thing at all. You could tell by the muscle mass that it was strong. It never made a noise, and I never smelled anything either. After it vanished into the trees, I dropped my cigarette like I said, and ran inside because even though I was in total awe at what I saw, I was pretty freaked out. I had no idea that we had upright walking lizards out here. Like I said, just being a small town boy from Colorado, this was way out of my environment. I didn't tell any of my friends when they got home later that night, and I kind of kept this encounter to myself for a really long time. But I do think about it from time to time. All these reptilian accounts you've been posting over the last few months have really brought me back to that moment, and I figured it was time for me to share mine. Now I know many of the accounts you share explain vastly different creatures, most of them acting very hostile and aggressive. While I don't think I saw any of those creatures you told, I definitely can stand behind the fact that it was an upright walking reptilian humanoid creature. It was very tall and enormous. I never saw it again after that, because the following year, I moved back to Colorado. Anyway, thank you for letting me share my experience with you. Back in the year 1998, I was near the Omaha Reservation, along the Missouri River, in northeastern Nebraska. This is what I was told was one of the hotbeds of Thunderbird sightings, and surprisingly, I had my own. I was with a hiking partner, going up a trail, when we saw, maybe about 40 yards to the north, a large bird ascend above the treetops, up into the sky. We only saw it as soon as we did, because of the immediate movement. It was large and white, and had an enormous wingspan, far bigger than any bird that I have ever seen. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this bird was probably 4 times that of an eagle. Its body and head alone would have been the size of a human torso and head, maybe larger. It shot up from the treetops and ended far away in the direction heading southeast. It didn't make any noise or call that any birds usually make. My friend and I were shocked at what we saw. I was familiar with animals and creatures of living legends like Bigfoot and Thunderbird, but I never knew that I would see one for myself. Not now. Not ever. As I spent more time in the area and the Omaha Reservation, I would learn that this is actually a hotbed spot for not only the Bigfoot phenomenon, but Thunderbird as well. Maybe among the natives who don't really share their sightings with many people outside the res. However, if you get a chance to sit down and talk with them, they will share with you story after story of these things in the area. I wasn't frightened at all, and I never felt threatened by seeing this creature. It was probably the most majestic thing I've ever seen. Its size alone was impressive. I felt like I saw a Pegasus or something for the first time. Something you would feel like is supposed to exist during the time of Greek gods. It was a beautiful sight to see. I feel so special for getting to be gifted for seeing such a rare animal. I saw a bird larger than any animal you could ever imagine. It was like a flying bison, it was so huge. I could tell you the exact date and time this happened too. It was June 28th, 2011. I was driving down in southern New Mexico. There were other vehicles on the road at the time of this sighting. It was a very hot sunny day, clear skies, not a cloud to be seen. Temperatures are soaring down there. If you've ever been in the desert, you know how hot it gets. I saw this large flying object, what I thought was an object, descend closer to the ground, and then fly westbound past some smaller mountains. It glided with ease, and I never saw it flap its massive wings once. I saw as it got closer that it was actually the largest bird I'd ever seen. I watched it the entire time it appeared, until the time it cleared the horizon, all the while maintaining my composure behind the wheel. I wasn't even sure if what I was seeing was real. The bird looked to be gray in color from what I could tell just by the way the light was hitting it. I've never seen a bird that looks like that before, let alone being the size of an actual bison flying through the air. I'm sure I was not the only one who saw this thing flying, because it wasn't a desolate lone road. There were multiple other cars driving around me, since that area I was driving around was very open, and anybody with a clear view of the sky would have seen it. I'm gonna guesstimate that it was probably a couple hundred feet off the ground. It was very high up in the sky and descended pretty low, to probably about a couple hundred feet altitude, and then it disappeared off on the horizon to the west. That was the only time I've ever seen an animal that I could not identify. My Thunderbird sighting happened back in the spring of 2018. I was just outside the small town of Berlin in Connecticut, alongside Highway 15. I saw what I can only describe as the biggest bird in existence. This thing flew from one side of the road to the other, very low to the ground, but still above the trees. It just happened to be passing over as we were driving. It was a clear afternoon, around 1 p.m. I was with myself and my mother in the car, but I saw it in front of me and kind of almost pooped when I saw it. I saw it for approximately 3 seconds as it flew from one side to the other, but it looked just like an oversized blackbird, the size of my small sedan. I saw it had a curvature at the end of its beak that pointed downward, and kind of like a gizzard beard thing that hung down from its neck. No, not like a turkey gizzard, but like an extra thing of hair that dangled down. I've been out in the forest and lived life long enough to know that that was not a normal creature you're going to see every day. Not anybody I knew or know personally, but just heard things through people I've known. I live outside the city of Kingston, New York, and good old Ulster County. I don't know if you would know anything about this, but it's something that I find particularly interesting. I've heard stories of a massive bird that flies down and swoops up cattle. Crazy, ain't it? Well, apparently it's been spotted enough times that people are on the lookout for it around here, and it's even been shot at multiple times because, I guess, it steals cows. Imagine that. A bird of prey large enough that can steal your livestock. I've not seen anything like it myself. I've only heard stories from people I know and friends of mine. I guess there was a ranch, from what I heard, about 70 miles from here, that lost so many cattle from this thing, they had to shut down indefinitely. I guess these birds would fly down, grab the cattle, fly about 300 to 400 feet in the air, and drop the cattle to let them fall to their death. Then they would fly back down and around, pick the dead cattle back up, and fly off with their fresh kill. Pretty harrowing stuff if you ask me. You can't make this up. I know it sounds like it's straight out of a horror fiction novel, but I'm hearing it from multiple different people, the same kind of stuff over and over. I guess it's not just around here either. It's even more common than you think as you go closer towards the Midwest, like Michigan, Ohio, that whole area. Just when times could not get any crazier, we have to deal with this. I guess there was an older gentleman somewhere along the way that actually ended up killing one of these things, and he kept a skull around, but that's all hearsay. And honestly, who really knows who has it now and where it's really at? If these kinds of birds really do exist, well, I guess it won't be too long before I see one myself. Anyway, just wanted to say I'm a huge fan of your channel and I watch all your videos. I thought you might really eat this information up. Thanks so much for reading. I'm not going to claim to know anything about birds because I don't. But I'm pretty sure birds do not come out at night, unless it's an owl or a bat. However, this one night we came across the largest nocturnal bird, but I'm pretty sure it was not an owl, just judging by its shape. And its size, of course, because owls don't get to be the size of a human. Let me explain. This was just in the fall of last year, October. Walking around outside with my dad and I at nighttime. It was roughly 10 p.m. That's when we heard a huge crash near us in the trees. My father and I looked up, and perched on one of the larger thick branches of the tree was this massive shape that resembled a bird. It was humongous and blacker than the darkness around it. I think that's one of the reasons why it stood out so much and why we were able to spot it almost immediately. It moved its head, and my dad and I just felt like it was staring at both of us. We couldn't see any eyes because of how dark it was. It was just this large black shape that resembled that of a perched bird. Here's the issue that I have with it. Birds don't get to the height of 6 or 7 feet. This thing perched on the branch was larger than my father or I, and right as we heard the crashing, the thing immediately folded its wings up, so neither of us truly saw its wingspan in full. If it was a bird that large, then its wingspan had to have been massive. I felt like it was probably a good idea to back away from this animal, because I did not feel safe, and the situation felt very unpredictable. My dad, without breaking eye contact on this thing, whispered to me quietly, "Back away slowly." We backed away all the way to the house without ever breaking sight on this bird, and it followed us with its gaze the entire way. It never broke its eye contact either, and it stayed perfectly still. We made it back to the house. The entire time we made it, we're both going nuts, thinking, what did we just see? What kind of animal is that? Is there even such a thing as nocturnal birds? Did we just see something new? About an hour goes by, and my dad steps back outside to see if he could still see it. Maybe it's still there. The spot in the tree that it was sitting at is now empty, meaning it was gone. Still, it's one of the weirdest things to have ever happened to me. I don't know that there was such a thing as a large nocturnal bird, but I guess there is now. The year was 2013, and I had spent the day with my girlfriend at the time at a nearby lake when we saw this huge hairy creature with a snout crossing one of the smaller roads. It scared us, but I tried to joke and play it off and say, "Oh look babe, it's your dad." Her dad is a really lumbering, tall, and very hairy man. My girlfriend at the time was very into the weird side of science, like Bigfoot and things of that nature. We talked about our sighting together, and she said that from what she knows about Bigfoots, they don't have snouts, and they don't look like a bear or a dog, and their heads are more cone-shaped. So we weren't really sure what to think about the whole ordeal. Later on in the day, we went and checked for tracks, which we couldn't find any. We looked where it had walked, but where it had walked over was gravel and thick grass with hard ground underneath. This thing walked from one side of the woods to the next, but it was in an open enough area where there was only sparse amount of tree coverage, and this is where we had full view of it without it ever seeing us. The sighting happened at around 3 p.m. in broad daylight. We had a perfect view in our sighting. The creature we saw was bulky and massive and covered in long reddish-brown hair. Since it was walking semi in our direction, we got a fairly decent look at its face and can see that it had a strong brow ridge and a shorter snout, resembling that of a bear or a bigger dog. I didn't see any ears to recall seeing any ears. Its arms were very long, and I couldn't really see any feet or anything specific about the hands, just because of the angle we were at. Its stride, though, was pretty humongous, considering it cleared the small gravel road in just 3 to 4 strides and was already off to a different segment of woods. Driving down a back road at around midnight with headlights and brights on, I saw a large, tall black animal walking on its back 2 legs toward my vehicle at first, and then off into the road. It crossed the road really fast. When I saw it, it was in the middle of the road, approaching me, and there was no other traffic on the road. I was coming around a sharp curve or bend in the road when I saw it. It had a surprised expression on its face. I was in shock myself, and I did not even think to put the brakes on. So this thing jumps out on the road, turns and walks towards me, and then is off to the other side of the road in a flash. I drive through, and I'm still in total shock at what I saw. I was on my way home from a late family outing, and one of the quickest ways is through this backcountry road. I've been driving through here for years, and I've never seen anything like that creature before in my life. I'll never forget its glowing yellow eyes. They look so unnatural, like you can get lost in them. I almost felt like if I would have stared at them long enough, I would have been in a trance. This entire thing was unnatural looking. Afterwards, I had to keep rubbing my eyes just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating or in a dream. When I got home, I spent about an hour researching and trying to find anything I could that would point me in the direction of matching the description of what I saw. I stumbled upon things like Bigfoot Encounters and the BFRO, but nothing on that website that I started looking through pointed me in the right direction. So I continued to search more and more, and that's when I found a creature called the Dogman. I spent some time reading up on stories that people had submitted, and that's when I came to these cryptid encounter YouTube channels, just like yours. I noticed yours, however, was one of the bigger ones, and so I began listening to the stories submitted by eyewitnesses. I was so shocked to conclude that this is the same creature that I saw that night. I must have caught it right as it was crossing the road, and I didn't realize I would be whipping right around the bend like that. The speed limit around the bend is 30, but the road was 45 itself. Since I know the road pretty well, and I would consider myself a local, like I said, I drive it a lot, so I was probably actually driving closer to 40 to 50 around the bend, and wham, my brights lit this thing up like a Christmas tree. I'm a guy that normally doesn't believe in Bigfoot or any of that silly stuff. In fact, I've always found it very silly. But now that I've had my own sighting of a Dogman creature, maybe there's more out there than science refuses to acknowledge. Maybe science can't explain everything like I thought it could. Anyway, I wanted to personally reach out to you and thank you for being such a good resource for us out here to submit our encounters to, and for us to share our experiences and stories to those who may not have had any. While my encounter with this creature wasn't necessarily violent or hostile, it could have gone that way rather quickly, because from what I know, these creatures can be very unpredictable. And sure, it might have just been crossing the road innocently, for all I know. That doesn't mean I would have wanted to run into this thing while I was out of my truck. I'll never forget my horrible sighting of a living, breathing nightmare. I saw a horrible sight at night, back in the wintertime, when me and 3 of my friends and I were around this frozen lake nearby. We started seeing this large black humanoid creature walking on 2 legs through the brush on the other side of the lake. The creature never saw us or would stop to look at us. It was about 8 feet tall, judging by what we know of the area, and walking like a proud giant. We first thought it was one of our friends in a costume trying to prank us. But then why would any of our friends come out here in the winter night where it's cold in a costume? But when we got a little closer, we realized that it was indeed walking just like a human. We are all hunters and have had extensive firearms training, and even we felt compelled not to shoot at something like this. We could not believe what it was we were seeing. We got so scared, we broke off from our group and went back to see if we could see this thing again after it moved away. However, we were unsuccessful in seeing it. It walked around the frozen lake and walked over a little incline deep into the dead woods. The lake or pond is only about 15 feet deep in the deepest parts, so some of the water is frozen, if not all of it, but it is shallow, and the shallow parts you can fall through, which is only about 3 feet deep. The one thing that does amaze me and scare me is the creature's feet did not leave any human-like tracks, even though it just walked like a human. They were large bipedal canine tracks. Again, the creature was completely black. I know the area well and have hunted here my entire life. In fact, very recently, the wildlife up here has almost totally disappeared in just the recent years. I don't know if the sighting we had any connection to that. I've been up north for hunting and fishing for years and have never experienced anything like this, so I don't know why I did down here. I do know of 2 other incidents that happened in this same area. Maybe I can get one of my friends to share this with you. But one was a sighting years ago in the same area, and the other a couple of months ago in another different area. I can tell you quite bluntly and very firmly that this is not a case of mistaken identity. This creature clearly resembled an upright walking creature, black as the night and covered in dark, long, matted hair. I have never seen anything like it in the area, and I've spent endless days and nights up here before scouting. Whatever this creature was appeared to be on a mission because it was walking on a fast pace, not to be distracted by anything, like us. Who knows where it was headed and what it was planning on doing. Dogmen are very real creatures. I have had 2 different encounters with 3 of them. My first encounter took place in March of 2018. I was walking in the woods behind my parents' house. It was around 11 p.m., and I was walking through an area where you have to go down around a pond. As I was walking down, I began to hear a very loud guttural growl. At first I thought it was a bear, but it was too loud, and the growl was very close to the left of me. Then, about 1.5 meters away, there was another creature that I did not hear, but I saw movement. That's when I realized whatever this was, there were 2 of them. One surrounding me, and the other off to my right that I then heard another growl from. That's it, I thought. I was in grave danger. When I got to the spot where I saw both creatures, they both growled again, and then the tree that I was near began shaking violently, which again was right near me. I slowly began to back away, but the 2 creatures were still there, almost as if they were trying to bait me to walk closer. I slowly made my way back to my parents' house without either of them following me, by going very, very slowly. If I turned and ran, I thought they would just give chase and I would be a dead man. My parents were outside talking, and they asked me what was going on, seeing me coming back up so soon, since when I normally would go down there, I would spend a long time. I told them what had happened, and to my surprise, they appeared to believe me, or maybe they knew something I didn't, because both of their faces went white. I didn't have the words to really describe what I saw myself that night. I felt like I was walking around in a real life horror movie. The second encounter took place on May 7th of 2018, around 12:30 in the morning. I was walking back to my car after dropping my friend off at the airport. I was roughly a quarter of the way to my destination when I started hearing a sound that reminded me of a wolf or a coyote, a howling, very distant in the wind. My windows were rolled down, and the sound kept getting closer and closer. I was driving slow. It sounded like something was running directly at my car, and it began to get so loud that the vibrations hurt my chest. I could feel something big was coming, so I slowed my car to see what I was hearing, to listen closer. I saw two eyes, a large head, a torso that was massive, and a long strides breaking out of the trees on the side of the road, headed towards my vehicle. The creature was about to cross and jump into the road, but stopped in its path as soon as it broke into the opening, staring me down from the woods. This thing was a hulking behemoth, and I wasn't going to waste any time staring at that thing more than I needed to. I got out of there as fast as I could. To give you an idea, a visual, so to speak, if you've ever seen what a minotaur looks like, very humanoid looking, a fully ripped bodybuilder body, ripped legs, ripped arms, huge hands, imagine that, with the hocks of a dog and dog feet, with huge hands and claws, and then for the head, just a big dog head that more or not resembled a German Shepherd. That's what this thing looked like, and it was probably around 8 to 9 feet tall, if not bigger. When I say this thing was huge, I mean it was unrealistically huge. Anyway, that's my story. I hope you enjoyed it. I was out hunting small game in Camp Blanding on the Still Hunt side, close to Cemetery Road. I had a friend of mine about 150 yards to my right and about 30 to 40 yards in front. I saw something running between us, going from my right to in front of me. It was between the two of us. It stopped about 50 to 60 yards in front of me, turned and looked at me. I stood, looking, trying to figure out what I was seeing for maybe 30 seconds. I then got down on one knee and watched about 45 seconds. It turned to its right, my left, and was gone. It was dark brown, almost black, running kind of like an old man that had back problems, bent over a little at the waist. It was on 2 legs, not 4, as all other animals in the woods have. I could see the arms moving as it ran, just as a man's would when he is running. I am 6 foot tall. I walked to the spot that I sought, looking at the tree it was beside, and was looking to see if I could tell how tall it was. From what I could tell from what I saw, it stood about 7 foot tall. I looked for any tracks, found none as it was a swamp. Nothing but water. But you could see evidence that something was there from the way the grass and the water was laid over. I called to my friend, asked if he saw anything. He said no. We both began walking, hunting more, all the while I was thinking about what I saw. We walked about a half mile from where I saw it, whatever it was, and he saw a very large pile of feces on the ground. We both looked at it for a while, poking at it with sticks, trying to figure out what kind of animal that could have come from. We both have hunted for over 35 years each and have never seen anything like this. We saw a lot of grassy materials and a lot of berries in it. No hair, bone, or anything that you would see from most carnivores in the woods. I didn't get the date exactly, but it was a few days before we had to go back to school. Me and my friends were camping in the woods in Middleburg. It was about 9 or 10 p.m. at night. I didn't have a watch on me, so I can't be exact. But as me and my friends were hanging out, I decided to take a walk along the creek that basically circled the camp. Well, it had been about 15 minutes after I left my friends when I decided to sit back down by the creek. Well, a minute later, I heard some rustling leaves and sticks across the creek, so I listened closely. I had a flashlight, but I did not use it yet. It stopped at the edge of the creek. Well, when it stopped, I turned on the light, and about 5 yards out of the light's beam, a large creature saw the light, and turned around and just took off running. It had to have been large because as it ran 10 to 20 yards into the brush, it was shacking and pushing trees out of the way. And these trees were decently thick, a good 6 inches thick. It stopped about 30 yards in and gave off a weird, disturbing, in my best description, a growling snarl. It's hard to describe exactly. That's when I yelled an exclamation and ran back to camp. I could hardly find my way back to camp. My friends had to help me. The best part of the creature that I saw was partially the back of its head. It was a brownish black and looked kind of ragged. If I had to give a good height estimate, about 6 or 7 feet tall. But it was dark, so it was hard to tell. I told my friends what had happened, and I think they didn't pay much mind to it. But later on that night, about 1 or 2 a.m., one of my friends said he awoke and heard a weird howling just about a mile away in the direction of my encounter. In 1974, I was 12 years old at the time, visiting my sister, M, and her family in Davie, Florida, with my cousin A, who was also 15 at the time. One night, we were sleeping on a pull-out couch in the sitting room when we smelled something like a skunk, only worse. We asked my sister what it was, and she said it was the skunk ape, and he comes around in the hottest summers. We didn't believe her, so we asked our friends, and they said it was real. One night, while we were sleeping, we seen a huge shadow come across the picture window. Then it turned, looked at itself, and let out a blood-curdling scream that scared us half to death. Then it turned and walked to the side of the house, and we followed it by going in the side bathroom. There, it squatted down to eat a wild watermelon. Then, it went back to the house to a man-made lake, squatted down and drank some water. A few nights later, the beast attacked a wild horse in its corral, but the horse got away by jumping over the corral and ran off into the pasture. The rancher came out and took a few shots at the beast, but it got away. When the horse came back, it had fingerprints on its hindquarters. Not scratches, but finger marks. A few nights later, the beast came back and killed a farmer's bull. The farmer took a few shots at the beast, but missed it. At the same time, my sister and her husband Jay were coming home from a night out, and the sheriff and his deputy were on patrol. We jumped into Joe's car and followed the deputy when the beast stepped out of the darkness and was hit by the police car. The beast went down, and when it got up, it looked into the police car and let out a blood-curdling yell. We were about 10 feet behind the deputy car when the beast hit the police car with both hands, and the back of the car came off the ground. Then it limped off into the swamp. When the sheriff got there, the car looked like it had hit a utility pole. Just then, the farmer came over and told the sheriff that his prized bull was now dead. This bull was huge, at least a ton, with its head ripped off and thrown across the pasture. That's when they called in the state police with their horses and dogs and helicopters. They searched the swamp all night, but found nothing. First, I'll start with the fact that I've never had to put much thought into the whole Bigfoot phenomenon. I have degrees in wildlife management and wildlife biology, and I have been a working biologist for at least 17 years. I have never believed that something could exist that has never left any concrete evidence. Furthermore, nothing similar has ever been found in the fossil record that I know of, so that has led me to believe what I know about Bigfoot to be false. Until the weekend of November 24th, 2013. I am an avid birdwatcher and wildlife photographer. I take very long hikes in various wild areas around Tampa this time of year to photograph whatever I find. I was hiking at Cypress Creek Preserve, which is in between Interstate 275 and 75 near the apex where they meet. I was walking on one of the rather wide trails and I came to a stop because I heard a noise. I had seen quite a few wild pigs that morning, and I thought I could photograph one crossing the trail in front of me. I was looking down at my camera, adjusting the ISO settings, and I saw something large move out of the corner of one of my eyes, my left, approximately 200 feet away. As soon as I saw the movement, I looked directly at it, and it was already halfway across the trail at this point. My eyes were directly on the animal as it walked, upright, across the rest of the trail and into the brush. It was very large, at least 6 feet tall or more, completely black in color with a very wide chest from front to back. It was walking completely upright with a very fast, purposeful pace. The animal was leaning forward slightly, but did not seem awkward with its steps, like a bear would be while walking upright. I slowly walked over to the spot where I could saw it cross, and I could still hear it moving through the woods in the distance. I immediately noticed that all the birds around me had stopped chirping, and the insects had stopped making noise as well. I looked for tracks or hair left on the plants in the area, but found nothing. I was able to get a picture of the palmetto on the trail where it crossed, and I put my tripod near it for the height comparison. I am extremely knowledgeable about the wildlife in Florida, but I cannot explain what type of animal that I saw this weekend. I, a female lady, was driving on a clear day on I-75 in the afternoon on a spring day from Sarasota to Tampa, going north 65 to 70 miles per hour on the far right lane. This would be on the east side of I-75. I had to take an exam in Tampa the next day, so I know the exact date that I was traveling. My window was slightly open on the passenger side to let the fresh air in. I was driving on the far right side of the highway in a heavily tropical wooded area when I saw what I first thought was a man walking fast about 50 feet away from the highway in a light grassy meadow with thick brush or tropical woods behind him. As I got closer, I saw that it was not a man, but a creature that looked like a man, with approximately 3-inch long brown hair covering its body from head to foot. When I was parallel to the creature, it quickly went into the brush wooded area and disappeared. It looked like tall, thick brush or woods. The creature looked like a male, around, I'm guessing, 6 to 7 feet tall, with a thick body, thick legs, and wide shoulders. I could see the brown body hair as it turned its whole body all at once, bent its head, and went into the brush and woods. It was going north the same direction as me, and walked quickly with wide steps, with knees bent before it turned into the brush or woods. As I drove off, I couldn't get over what I just saw. It happened in about 30 seconds. My car smelled like rotten eggs, sulfur, or just strange awful odor for about 10 minutes after. I was not afraid. It did not look scary, just really strange. It happened so fast and without warning. I don't have very much personal experience with skinwalkers, but I do have a very disturbing story to relate to you. Very recently, a close family friend of mine died, and the circumstances in which he was killed, I believe, are even more strange. Let me give into details. I frequently visit the Navajo Res, where a lot of my family lives. I'm mostly full-blooded myself, but not quite. But I do not live on the Res. I do, however, spend a lot of time here, because most of my friends and family are full-blooded. Well, we have a close friend, whose name I will keep unidentified, but I will note him to you as John. John was a very recently found dead man, just a little ways out of town. But here's the manner in which he died that we all found very odd. He was discovered by his eldest son, and he had not died from exposure or tripping and falling, or anything that you think an older man would. The blood from his body was drained completely. He was as pale as a sheet when they took him, and they could not find any marks on him that even show any way for the blood to be drained out of his body. He was found lying in the middle of the desert, completely untouched, and not even a single part of decay. It looked like he had been there for probably about 2 days. There were no signs of a struggle, like he had been attacked or anything. It really bothered me. We've been mourning his death, but we want more than that. We want answers. He was a close part of our personal community, and even more so, an integral part of our family. Without him, it's never going to be the same. But I'm reaching out to you because I want answers, and I wanted to know if you had any. My older brother speculates that it was indeed a Skinwalker that did this to him. Unfortunately, John was well known in the community for making deals with people he could not keep, and ripping them off from time to time. He has also made several enemies over the years and burned bridges. Maybe not enemies is the right word, but people that he just rubbed the wrong way, that would have any reason to do harm to him. I worry, well, we are all worried that he screwed the wrong person, and they may have hexed him or put a curse on him. It's no secret that there are many around here who practice dark arts in secrecy, and if this is true, then I know that it was only a matter of time before John sealed his own fate. Out of all my time being here, though, I have never heard of anybody being found with all the blood being drained from their bodies, with no indication of how it was drained. No marks, no holes, no gashes, no cuts. The other thing that really struck me was that he had been sitting out in the hot desert sun for 48 hours plus, completely dead. Yet, biologically, he showed zero signs of starting decaying or beginning to rot. I really don't know what to think of this, but myself, again, I want to know if you have any answers. If you decide to read this, and your viewers hear me, hopefully they can put some answers, because this really disturbed me, and I want to know the truth. I firmly believe that I am being targeted currently by a Skinwalker, and it is coming to my house every night and trying to pull me away. Every night when I try and go to sleep, I can feel this thing approaching my house. It's this incredibly horrible feeling that just sits in your stomach and works its way all throughout your body. It's this intense fear that overtakes you. You can feel it in the air, and it is so thick you can cut it with a knife. Then, the voices start. I hear random voices all around and outside the house, like there is some big congregation of people that I can't see. I usually can't make out what they're saying, but it sounds hushed, whispers, or quiet talking. It's never consecutive or consistent. It's random every time, in volume and location. What disturbs me is that I think it's a Skinwalker, and here's why. Throughout all the course of hearing all these voices, the Skinwalker, I believe, is imitating my dead mother and calls my name in her voice from outside the house. My mother passed away of breast cancer about 7 years ago in the spring. She's dead. She ain't coming back. Something is out there mimicking her voice and trying to call me outside to get me out of the trailer. Listen, I've never been a person that pays attention to ghosts or any sort of thing like that. Sure, I have watched ghost hunters from time to time, but paid no attention to anything of that realm of the unseen, so to speak. So, I don't know if this is a ghost or if it's some sort of demon. I've told a few people who I know that I am close with, and they all point to a Skinwalker. I had to actually look up what a Skinwalker was, and now that I know what it is, it's kind of freaking me out. This happens every single night, and it happens the same way. It does not let up. I don't know why it wants me, or what I did to antagonize it. Did I cross into a certain territory, or did I say something wrong? Is there anything I can do to repel this thing and get it to stop harassing me? So far, it has not tried to open my door or approach my trailer in any way. But every night, I hear it out there, mimicking my mother's voice, trying to get me outside. I haven't seen it because, to be completely honest with you, I am terrified to open up my window and look out and see that it's there. I don't want to know what it looks like. I don't care. I just want it gone, whatever the hell it is. I have a story that will terrify you, and I've been wanting to share it with you. But first, before I do, I wanted to make a connection with the story that you previously read. I'm not exactly sure where you acquired this story from, whether it be from Reddit or that somebody actually sent it to you. And no, I don't know this individual. I just made the connection when I heard the story. But this story, the one that you read, is about an individual who visited the Bullfrog Marina in Lake Powell, Utah. That's exactly where mine happened. Years ago, I was visiting there while I was driving up the state, and of course I stopped there at nighttime. I was stalked by something, what I considered to be a creature of the night maybe. Maybe it was a skinwalker. Maybe it was something else, but whatever it was really big and black, and had bright yellow eyes that were watching me. I am familiar with the idea of Bigfoot, and I don't want to say that this was a Bigfoot. It did not look like a big, bulky football player in any way. It had a very slim build, and was lanky and tall. It kind of crouched over, and was hunched, if that makes any sense. Plus, from the figure I saw at least, from what I can make out the face, it was weird looking. I can't really describe it to you, but from average depictions of a Bigfoot, it didn't look anything like it. I really don't know what's out in the desert like that, so if we're going to cross all of our T's and dot all of our I's, I'm going to say it's a skinwalker, going by what little I know. The first time I noticed it was when my headlights hit it, and it was so black that I couldn't even see any distinctive features. Whatever it did not want to be seen, because it remained hiding behind some sagebrush. Scared me to death is what it did, and it continued to watch me the entire time I was there. It got braver and braver, and crept closer and closer until I finally leapt. If you must know, because I can't leave this detail out now, because the story won't really make sense why I saw this thing and I continued to stay there. I had brought this girl with me, whom I wasn't quite dating, but we had this on and off fling. I was trying to get her to do the nasty with me, and she had not seen this thing yet. I was not going to let that thing stop my selfish sexual conquest. Even though I knew this thing was out there and was creeping ever closer to me in my vehicle, I tried to pursue this girl, and it didn't actually end up working out. To be honest, I'm just kind of an asshole, so I guess I deserved it. I never said anything or made mention of this thing approaching our car slowly to get to the girl, but it got too close for comfort, and I decided to cut my efforts short and get out of there before it got too out of control. That same girl, I eventually lost communication a few months after this happened, and no, we never did end up hooking up. But that's my experience with the Bullfrog Marina. Sure, it might be a beautiful area to check out, but I strongly advise you only go there during the day, because there is something sinister that hangs out there at night, and they will surely check you out. Okay, so this just happened 2 weeks ago, and I am still scared absolutely poopless. I don't want to be vulgar, so you can guess that that last word is actually a swear word. I was driving down through New Mexico late at night. If I had ever listened to any creepy stories, I guess I would have known that that's a huge mistake, right? Well, I don't normally listen to creepy stories, so I'm driving. I'm the only one on the road at the time. I have my radio connected to my phone that is streaming from Spotify. I'm blasting Africa by Toto when I start to hear this static that gradually overtakes the song. I'm now wondering what's going on. Why is Spotify acting up? Spotify doesn't act like that. It's like I was listening to the radio and there was an interference. That's exactly what it sounded like, but that's impossible. I'm streaming from my phone, which by the way has 4 bars at the time, so there's impossible for any reception to go down. The static continues to get louder, and eventually overtakes the entire song before the song ends. Now, I'm beginning to freak out, as I'm half looking down at my phone screaming at it, and my Spotify, while trying to keep my eyes on the road. That's when I begin to notice a horrible sight around me. These tall, horrible figures that are completely black with glowing red and yellow eyes are approaching me from all sides of the desert. If that's not scary enough, in that moment, my car starts deaccelerating. even though I'm pushing as hard as I can on the acceleration pedal, and nothing is working. To say I was going through a full-blown panic is a complete understatement of my emotions in the moment. My car begins to slow down more and more. 40 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour. These shapes, these humanoid figures were getting closer and closer to my vehicle. They were incredibly tall, but they didn't exactly resemble people, but they did have two glowing eyes. I thought I was having a nightmare, or maybe I had fallen asleep at the wheel. This was the worst vision or hallucination that I've ever had in my life, if this is what it really was. Before my vehicle came to a complete stop. Keep in mind, right now the radio won't turn off. It's blaring static. My vehicle is about to come to a complete standstill, and it's still on. Nothing by looks has malfunctioned, and I'm pressing as hard as I can on the gas pedal, and these things are nearing my vehicle. In that moment, in my rearview mirror, I see two large lights coming my way, and I just remember saying to myself, "Oh, thank you, Lord Jesus." And as soon as I said that, the static went away within a second, and my car began accelerating again. It was a semi-truck that was hauling ass heading towards wherever it had to go, but it was coming up on me fast, and I also noticed those things that were approaching my car were now gone. You bet that I hauled it up to 70, 80 miles an hour as fast as I could and cruised it out of there. Africa continued to play at the exact same spot that the static fully took over, even though I hadn't messed with the song, paused it, or stopped it. I was so shaken that I had to stop at a nearest gas station and collect myself before searching and finding a motel and calling it a night. Not my original plan at all. They say freaky stuff happens out here in the desert, and I don't know what I would call this experience, except a horrible nightmare come to life. I know people send you all sorts of crazy stories, but I had something happen to me that even I have a hard time accepting. I want you to know that I still have a really hard time believing this. Even recounting it to you is weird, but it is what happened. This was the fall of last year, when I was gathering up firewood. There's a place up in the mountains that I live by, that I go to cut up large felled trees. It's usually pretty desolate, and not really anybody goes up there. So, it makes for a good place for me to load up on rounds and rounds of wood to haul back. I was by myself at this time, so there were no other witnesses. I was loading firewood into the back of my truck when I heard a crashing sound behind me. About 25 yards away, out from the trees, about 50 feet in the air, this creature came swooping down at my truck and then flew back up on the other side. I panicked and thought to myself, what is this thing? It was black and had large bat wings after it swoops down and flew back up into the nearby pine tree and held onto the tree. It had large glowing red eyes and huge fangs. It looked like a freaking gargoyle. That's exactly what it looked like. I kid you not. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but I have nothing else to compare it to. Maybe a flying demon or something. It had its sights set right on me. Then it swoops down again at me, from not even 40 feet up in the tree, and I have to dive to the ground to miss it. It squawks this horrible cry. I'm swearing up a storm and running for my truck to get the hell out of there, even though the bed of my truck is wide open, and I got wood rounds that are just sitting there, and I know everything's gonna fly out. I was being attacked by, I don't even know what it was, and I was prepared to leave all my tools and chainsaw behind. None of that mattered in that moment. I jumped in my truck before this thing could make another dive at me, and I drove down this dirt road with this thing flying after me, hot on my tail. Wood rounds and other miscellaneous tools I had are flying out the back. I didn't even have time to close the bed. I had lost all the wood I had back there. Being on a dirt road, you can't just floor it at 60 miles an hour. So this thing flies down and lands right on the roof, and then tries sticking its fingers and claws in my window. I have to try and start swerving violently to shake it off my car on this dinky dirt one-lane road. And finally, it gives before almost tipping my truck over completely. I'm going way too fast as it is on this mountainside, and honestly, I'm surprised I did not topple over down the sharp embankment going down this grade as fast as I did. I knew it was still above the truck, hovering, but as I got into the denser part of the trees down at the bottom of the grade, I didn't see it anymore. I kept driving and driving. When I got to a certain spot, about 20 miles away, where I could pull over and sit there in my truck and process what the hell just happened. Before this, if you would have told me anything remotely close to what I just told you happened, I would have laughed in your face and told you, haha, nice fiction story. However, once I went through this myself, I feel more trauma than anything else. There really isn't much else to add to the story, other than I was attacked by some sort of flying creature that I cannot identify. Yes, it looked like a demon or a gargoyle. I don't know what else to call it. It was black and had wings just like a bat. It was larger and taller than me, and had long claws that it used to try and pry the window open into my truck. I don't know what kind of animal or creature looks like this, but this did. I've been up to that area several times before, and that thing has never ever been seen. I've never had that happen to me before. I've never had this thing swoop down at me like that, and it just appeared to come out of nowhere. Not only am I traumatized, but I'm confused. Where did this even come from? A very scary thing happened to me about a month ago, right after the 4th of July. I live not too far from Black Bear Lake area. I was walking my dog one evening after dark, about 11 p.m., and all of a sudden, my dog starts growling and acting really, really strange. Keep in mind that my dog is a year-old Labrador Retriever, and he is very gentle and very docile. Even when I first got him calmed down, he still seemed nervous to be walking outside at night. That's weird because this is never the case. Anyway, as I was walking towards my house to turn around and head back, which is about 40 minutes, suddenly, my dog literally starts growling and going psycho again, and starts taking off, pulling free from my leash. As soon as my dog goes about 10-15 feet away from me, he's very fast. He suddenly stops in his track, stops growling, and starts looking back at me very nervously. He was just looking at something intently that I couldn't see in the darkness. All of a sudden, my dog begins whimpering and acting even more strange. And that's when I began to feel it. This immense feeling like just something was wrong. The feeling was fear. My dog felt it too. He was staring at whatever was causing this, just beyond my field of vision, in the dark. That's when I heard this unearthly growl. I was carrying a small flashlight with me on the time that I was using to light my way, and so I began shining it all around me frantically, but I couldn't see a thing. Quickly and nervously scanning over the entire area, and that's when I scanned it over the area that I heard the growling, and that my light went right over the face of a creature that came straight out of my nightmare. Dark in color, reptilian-like eyes, and a mouth full of razor teeth. It was grinning right at me, opening its mouth, hissing. To be completely honest with you, the first thing that popped into my mind was the demon from the Insidious movies. That demon scared the hell out of me when I first saw it. And this thing, I was looking right at it. It resembled that thing very close. Very identical looking faces. Then, this thing screams an ungodly scream and jumps up and flies off into the air in the night, revealing a humongous, ungodly wingspan. As it screams and flies away, me and my dog take off running back to the house at record speed. I don't even think it took me and my dog 15 minutes to get back to the house, when it should have easily taken more than 30 minutes. I contacted the police and reported this incident right away. I did not have any idea what exactly was growling or what this creature was, but I reported an unknown creature that appeared to be hostile. They did send an officer out about an hour later, and when he came to, he got a report of exactly what I saw 100%. I was honest and told him exactly down to the T what I saw and what happened as I was walking home. He asked me the typical police officer questions. Where were you? Why were you out so late? What were you doing? You know, the usual BS. I didn't have time for this, so I answered everything honestly and truthfully. He seemed to take me seriously, surprisingly, and told me he was going to go take a look around. After about 20 minutes going in the direction that he came from, he came back and said a bunch of the trees that he had told me I came from were torn up and looked to be broken. I was confused and meant what? He said it looked like there were large claw marks all over, and some of these trees were even knocked over. He said that some of these smaller trees were not only clawed up, but partially collapsed due to something greatly heavy resting on them. He told me he doesn't know too much about bears, but you may have saw a bear up in that tree that jumped off. Before I can tell him off for writing it off as being a large brown bear that was perched up on a branch and then jumped away, he told me that he's not the first person to hear a report with a similar sighting like I just had. This area has been full of weird things happening, and the officer even shared with me some weird things that have even happened to him while he was out on duty, and kind of shared with me some other personal stories. He's not really sure what to make of it himself, and as a firm skeptic when it comes to paranormal and stranger things, he just told me to keep an eye out in case anything weird does happen again. I'm part Native American, and I have lived on a reservation for quite some time back in the 90s, so I know weird things happening. It's kind of in my blood. I've even experienced bizarre things going on with a buddy of mine when we were hunting near our tribal burial ground, but that's for another time. I have no words to accurately describe to you the creature that I saw that night, other than pure fear and terror. And dogs. Dogs are very sensory-based creatures. They know when something is afoot. I trusted my dog's gut instincts, and he led me right. He knew this creature was there long before I did, and I don't even know how long it was watching me from the dark. Had I not shined a light on it and heard a growl, I would have walked right by it. Had I not had my dog with me, it probably would have grabbed me, or who knows what else. Why he was resting there in the trees near me, I'm not exactly sure. Maybe it was looking for its next victim, or maybe worse. Who knows? I've had friends in this area that have had weird experiences themselves, like seeing Bigfoot and other strange creatures they can't explain. So I guess I shouldn't be entirely surprised. But I saw what I did, even though I've never seen a creature like that before. The world we live in just continues to get more and more bizarre. My mother used to have a massive rose garden when I was a little kid. That was up in central Maine. It always seemed like it was in full bloom, and every spring I would go out and see how the roses looked. However, I think the rose garden attracted something evil. My mom would talk about seeing this strange black dog walking around her garden during the night. She said it would stand up on its hind legs and press its face against the windows of the house on the bottom floor. That's where our kitchen and living room was. Then it would run off and vanish. She described it as a strange-looking creature. However, it didn't really seem to scare her, as it did just make her a lot more alert of what was going on around her. However, one night, at around 3 a.m, my mother is a total night owl. She said she was laying in bed, flipping through the late-night infomercials on TV, and saw what she initially thought was a man sitting on the roof of her garden shed. She said it had a large dog head, pointed ears, and a long muzzle. She also said it had paws with fingers. The entire time she was talking about this being on the roof, She kept repeating how tall this thing was. 6 feet? 7 feet? She really couldn't explain it any other way. Then, the very following day was when my mom had a horrifying experience with 3 of these dogmen. They approached her while she was working in her garden and said that she thought they were werewolves. She knew without a doubt that these were the same creatures that she saw sitting on her garden shed roof and the same creatures trying to look into our first-story windows. She was so frightened by these horrid creatures approaching, she ran inside and locked the door. I was at school during this time, so I have no recollection of the event. She waited for them to leave. She talked about this days prior. Night and day she would hear these strange, unidentifiable noises coming from the wooded area behind the shed. This is where she believed these creatures were coming from. The sounds these creatures would make, we believed these were communicating to each other. It was like a clicking noise. They were not human-like at all, but had a guttural quality to them, and the sound was like they were talking to each other, definitely communicating to each other in some way. Over the years, she has heard them multiple times, but never saw them again after that last time, when the 3 of them came out of the woods behind the shed and approached her in her garden. This was years and years ago, and now later in life, she has started hearing strange howls and guttural sounds again. Very distinctive sounding. It's making her want to run away for good. I have had 3 separate dogman experiences in which I will share with you. I saw a dogman one time when I was driving out near the border of Florida State. I was 18 at the time, just got my license very shortly before this. It was late at night and eating on a carcass of a dead cow. I saw this thing looking over at me once I passed it, and then it jumped off the road and disappeared into the weeds and trees. That was my very first encounter with one of these creatures. The second encounter I had was when I was about 23 years oldish, laying in my bed, drifting off to sleep, when all of a sudden my room got really dark. I had my blinds open, and my head was against the wall, right underneath my window. Something really big stood in front of my window to block the light coming through, and in that very moment, I turned around and saw this hideous creature that stood on the other side of my window. It was like a really tall dog on steroids, and it kind of looked human-like. Its head was large, and its eyes glowed a dull red. Then, it growled a deep vibration, like a bell that went off in my chest. I knew this thing had to be some sort of massive alpha predator or something. It didn't see me because the angle I was laying at, but I laid there frozen in panic. I somehow mustered the courage to reach up quickly and shut my window blinds without even looking. It was still standing there when I did this. I don't even know if it saw me or not, as I quickly reached up and shut my blinds. But I heard it making this weird clicking noise and felt like it was planning a way to get into my house. Somehow or another, I managed to fall back asleep after a long while and not hearing anything anymore. I felt a false sense of security with my blinds down. It was probably a couple of hours before I could shut my brain back off from sheer exhaustion and fear. The last and final dogman encounter I had was just last year. This creature ran across the road that I live on, and I was near a long dirt road that goes out into the back country. I was driving that night, and I had to pull over and take a piss. Got back in my truck and began to pull out when I saw this creature. It was on its hind legs and was grasping onto this fallen tree right off the road. The area that opened up to this small section of woods around was about 6 feet wide. It looked kind of silly, pulling itself up on its hind legs, but once I got a good look, I realized what it was. I backed up slowly, and it seemed like it was sizing my truck up and staring at me. I maintained my composure and kept my foot on the brake. This thing is massive, and it felt like I was being watched very closely, like this thing could be very calculated in its next move. I tried flashing my brights at it to distract it, which just seemed to piss the thing off more than it already was. Deciding I shouldn't make a fool of myself, I whipped out of there and flew down the road. Fortunately for me, this thing wasn't following me, or on my tail that I could see. Anyway, those are my encounters. I'm sorry they're not more in depth, but that's about all that happened. No one can tell me dogmen don't exist, because I know they're real. They are real creatures that are out there. You just gotta be mindful of them and avoid them at all costs. I work really long shifts at my job and have to get up super early in the morning, like 3 or 4. Because of this, my wife and I have to try and plan extra early for date nights because I sleep so early. This evening in particular, we were coming back from town when I decided to pull over, and we just sat there and talked about things in our relationship for a long while. I told her I was starting to get really tired, and hopefully she didn't mind if I took a quick cat nap. She said that was fine, and I figured it would be better before we headed back to my father's house. I passed out, and my wife sat there on her phone, hand on mine, kind of cuddling while I slept. Then, my wife saw this big dog creature cross the road late at night. At the time, we were borrowing my dad's F-150 because my truck was currently having its alternator worked on. His truck was parked off the road just a little bit away from the house. My wife said it had red eyes and a long muzzle. She said it was kind of hunched down and dragging its feet. She got a good look at it. She wakes me up immediately and tells me she just saw this thing go across the road into a big empty field. She says that she has never seen anything like it before, and she doesn't believe in dogmen. I have only ever heard of them, but she seemed very genuinely terrified at what she saw. She told me it didn't notice our truck or us sitting in it, but it really freaked her out. We immediately drove back home, which was close by. This is where my wife finally was able to recant her experience to my dad, but he did not believe her and thought we were seeing things, or she was seeing things. The dark plays tricks on your eyes, he says, but I believe her 100%. It's crazy because my wife is a firm skeptic of anything out of the ordinary. So for her to be so genuinely scared of what she saw makes me believe a little differently. The next morning, she brings out a detailed sketch of what this thing looked like. By the way, my wife is a very detailed and incredible artist, and I still find her sketch hard to accept. What I find most shocking is the fact that none of us have ever seen an animal out there like this before. The creature she drew had no tail, long back legs, and the entire body was covered in fur. The thing looked like a dog or a wolf with a human-like head and face. Not a full canine or human face, but more like the appearance of a dog or wolf with a human's matted fur and deep-set eyes, if that makes sense. She showed me and my father and told us this is what she saw. She stayed up late last night drawing this because she was so bothered by it. The sketch disturbs me, but again, my father just thinks she had a bad nightmare or saw something in the dark and refuses to believe any of it. Back in 2010, I got the chance to go fishing off the coast of South Africa, where I saw the biggest shark of my life. Now, I want to stress to you that I've done cage diving before with great white sharks, and it is terrifying, even though it is a thrill. What I saw in the waters this day was larger than any great white shark that I've ever seen. It also looked vastly different. Great white sharks are very distinctive looking. Most of you, assuming you are sharing this with your readers, will know exactly what a great white shark looks like. They look different than a tiger shark or a goblin shark. The shark I saw had a much more narrow face, and if I'm guessing size here, which I'd be pretty good at, I would say it was anywhere between 30 to 40 feet in length. Its overall body, I believe, was more narrow than a great white shark, because a great white has more girth to it. However, great white sharks, unbeknownst to people who don't have experience with them, aren't these crazed blood-seeker man-eaters like Hollywood portrays them. They're not hostile, really. However, the shark we encountered, this single shark that I've never seen before in my life, acted incredibly hostile. It tried to ram into the boat several times and tried to knock some of us overboard out into the water. At least that's what I sensed. I'm just going to say right now that no, I don't believe this was a megalodon, and no, this wasn't a Jaws scenario where it was out to get the ship. I think we had somehow provoked it and angered it, which I just don't understand how. Tiger sharks are also very aggressive sharks and have a very bad temperament. I'm still just trying to figure out how we provoked this particular shark. I have some things to share about this experience and why it's weird. South Africa happens to be a hotbed of shark gatherings because it is also where, during a certain time of year, there's a mass gathering of sea lions and seals. You might want to fact check me real quick for that, because it might just be one or the other. But either way, it's basically a giant dinner bell for a lot of sharks. So what that means is you'll see a huge congregation of sharks coming to this area certain times of year to feed. And because of that, like us, we were lucky to run into a shark that nobody, at least I, hadn't seen before, larger than any great white I'd ever seen or cage dived with. Fortunately, none of us were in the water at the time of this sighting, and the shark only hung around for maybe 15 minutes at most before going and swimming away. None of us tagged it or touched it. It never tried to jump up out of the water and bite us. Nothing Hollywood happened. I'm not going to sit here and feed you some creepypasta sea monster story like you probably want. I'm going to give you reality and facts because it's what you deserve. Anyway, the second detail that I wanted to share with you is that there is speculation that a megalodon is still in existence. And you guessed it, it's speculated to be living right exactly where we were fishing, the South African coast. I don't know if it's necessarily just because of the food source or if it has to do with the climate. It could be a combination of both. There have been whales and other large sea mammals that have washed up with large chunks taken out of them that are far larger than a great white shark. I don't know if we necessarily saw a megalodon that was potentially an adolescent or a juvenile, which is very possible, but I can 100% truthfully say that none of us have ever seen a shark this size that looks quite like this. You might be disappointed to know that it wasn't a 70-foot behemoth of a shark like megalodons are painted to be, but like I said, it is possible this was just an adolescent of a megalodon. You need to remember that the ocean is a vast unexplored territory, and many things could be living and hiding within it. Hell, in the past 20 years alone, with technology ever increasing, we've discovered hundreds, if not thousands of new species that we never thought possible. Even in the last 50 years alone, we've actually been able to discover more and more fish that dwell at the bottom of the ocean, and sea life forms that we never thought would be possible. The possibilities here are endless when it comes to the sea. I think that's why the concept of sea monsters like large sharks, the kraken, giant squid, are just so intriguing because the possibility of them existing is actually very real. We can't fully explore all the depths of the ocean, and when so many nooks and crannies for large fish and creatures to live in and hide out, I don't think we'll ever fully know the truth. The last thing I wanted to tell you is that after the few of us on the boat saw the shark, we had a chance to talk to some of the local fishermen, and they too have seen the same species of shark. They had a specific name for it that they spoke about in their native tongue. One of the fishermen that I talked to said these things are very aggressive, and at one point even capsized his boat with him in it. Either way, it would be a terrifying situation to be having your ship just being capsized with a 30 to 40 foot carnivorous predator swimming beneath you. A lifelong friend of mine who has spent years and years in the Navy had some of the wildest stories to tell me about his time out at sea. Everything you can imagine, from weird lights in the sky to dealing with Somalian pirates, and even more hair-raising things you can imagine. One story that he shared with me, though, always gets under my skin because he knows I'm a sucker for sea monsters. In fact, when I first watched the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, my favorite parts were always when they were dealing with the Kraken, because it was just this monstrous, monolithic creature of the abyss. While he has not seen a creature like that in the ocean per se, he does have a story that is eerily not too far off. I'll preface this and say that I am terrible at reciting the story. I'll have to reach out to him and get him to contact you so he can give you the story in full with every detail. So for now, I'll just give you the basics of the story. While on a larger Navy ship, he didn't go into detail what kind of ship they were, but that they had spotted an extremely long animal swimming about 40 meters below the surface. This thing was so large that you could faintly see it through the water. My friend calls it the largest sea serpent that he's ever seen or heard of in his life, and told me this thing far exceeded the length of the boat, and the width was even larger than that of the boat. It had so much force underneath the water that it moved the ship off course and set them off path from this large moving object. He couldn't give me any estimates of how long or wide this creature was, but told me it was a behemoth of a creature. This makes me believe that there is such a thing as a Leviathan, if we're talking the size he truly told me. He's not a storyteller by any means, and he was dead serious when he was telling me this. Again, this is in the far South Pacific Ocean, the part of the ocean that also happens to be home to some of the deepest parts, with an average depth of around 14,000 feet, if I'm not mistaken. And also, the Mariana Trench sits in this part of the ocean as well. It shouldn't surprise me that something so large dwells in that area of the ocean. The sighting, I was told, was also well documented by that ship, so it's on file somewhere. It even freaked the captain out because he had never seen something so large in all of his days in the Navy. This is a true story that really happened to me back in 2006 when I was living near a beach in Florida, a rather small town in between some bigger beach towns. I had just driven back home to Oklahoma to visit and happened to talk to one of my best friends, Joe, into moving back to Florida with me. One night, Joe and I had decided we were going to head down to the beach, bring a couple of beers and some herb, and chill out down by the ocean. It was a nice night. As we pulled up, I remember parking my car in the beachside parking lot. We were listening to Sublime and opening our first beers when I told Joe I was going to go walk down to the beach. I kicked off my sandals and walked down to the ocean. The ocean was flat, waves barely rolling up against my ankles. As I'm standing there, gazing the open ocean, I hear Joe say something as he started walking down the car towards me on the beach. Then, what I can only describe as an ethereal light, blue lane of light, illuminates me. The light creates a lane, about 15 feet wide. The light illuminated the sand from the ocean to the top of the beach's sand dune. What struck me as odd was that it wasn't a broadcast light in a V shape from the origin. It was a parallel lane of light. It was illuminating the granules of sand in a way I'd never seen light do before. As it lit me up, I exclaimed to Joe, "What is that?" I began to search for the origin of the light. I didn't see nor hear anything in the sky above, so I focused my attention on the ocean. I could somehow sense that this light was coming from near offshore. I squinted to look for any stern lights, assuming that maybe this was coming from a boat. This was a clear night, and in a clear night off the Florida coast, you can see a boat's lights for miles off the coast into the horizon. I saw nothing. No boats, no shadow outlines along the horizon. Nothing. Still, I could sense that this light illuminating me was coming from a few hundred yards off the beach, still unable to physically see the object. This analysis all happened within a matter of probably 30 seconds as the light illuminated me. The light then slowly dissipated off of me. It then lit up Joe's lane for about 10 seconds, who had now descended the top of the beach and was almost closing in on me. Now he's freaking out. Then the light dissipates off of him and illuminated the lane on the other side of me, where there was nothing. Then, the light behaved in a way I will never forget. It did a rapid shuffle of the 3 lanes in a random fashion. It straight up scanned us. The next thing I know, a huge tidal wave is picking me up off the beach. The wave had to have been 20 feet tall. It picked me up off the ground and threw me face first onto the beach like a rag doll. If you've ever skateboarded, I'm sure you've heard the term scorpioned, where you eat it face first, and your legs wrap up over your head from behind you. Worst case scenario kind of ordeal. That's what happened. Not so gnarly. As I got up, I yelled for Joe. I heard him. He had been washed about 30 yards inland. I walked up to him and said, "Dude, are you okay? What the hell was that?" He was quivering and said, "I don't know, man." Just then, I felt this really creepy, spooky, sixth sense feeling come over me, like we'd just seen a ghost. He felt it too. It was written all over both of our faces. I said, "Let's get out of here right now." So we jumped back into my car and hauled ass back to the house. As we're sitting on the couch in the living room, trying to recount what had just happened on the couch, we must have been talking very loud. My cousin, who'd been in bed sleeping, comes out and says, "Guys, it's 4:30 in the effing morning. What are you guys out here yelling about? I gotta wake up for work in like an hour." He was pissed. Simultaneously, we both began blurting out what we had seen, and sounded like we were absolutely insane retelling of what had just happened. He didn't believe us, of course. He asked if we had taken hard drugs or were drunk. We weren't. We'd only both had one beer each. Then, as he goes back to his room to go to sleep, I looked over to my friend Joe and said, "Wait, 4:30? We went out there at like 11 and have only been gone for an hour." We both looked at each other with a frightened, spooked look again. The next day, I woke up and had a burn mark around my right eye socket from where the force of the impact on the beach had literally sandpapered what resembled a road rash on my face. I've told myself many things over the years to try and make sense of it. Government helicopters, submarines, tidal wave warning systems. But deep in my gut, I know that Joe and I will never forget, and coincidentally, also never fully remember the time we were possibly abducted by an unidentified, submerged object. I was 20 years old back then. Just a pup. I recovered fast, but the older I got, closer to my 30s, the worse and worse my back showed that I wasn't alright. That the tidal wave that scorpioned me up onto the beach had really messed me up. I have to use a back roller and a back massager daily to do physical rehab on myself from what feels like 3 to 4 completely blown vertebrae. It's literally a daily reminder that whatever happened out there on the beach that night in Florida really did happen. Years and years ago, I volunteered to do some local Forest Service work when one day, I was 17 or 18 years old at the time. I was asked to clear some thicker brush in this remote area for trail development. Because we had so little volunteers, I was the only one working this shift this day. I was by myself entirely. Because of my youth, I was very arrogant and sure of myself and my surroundings. How wrong I was. I hadn't even been clearing the brush for more than an hour when I started to see the tops of these large ears in the trees near me. These massive pointed ears that were bigger than any ears I'd ever seen. Then, whatever it was looked up at me through and behind the trees. I just saw these glowing yellow eyes looking back at me. From where I was standing, whatever I was looking at appeared to be well over 6 feet tall. The eyes were almost hypnotic. It was almost like you got sucked into them. They pierced into my soul. I felt as if the energy from the eyes hit me, and I felt a pull to run towards them. Like I was being lured away from my task to come towards whatever these eyes were attached to. I felt like I was in a trance, being controlled like a puppet to a puppeteer. I found myself almost beginning to walk towards them and not realize it before I snapped out of it and turned away. In that moment, I felt the gripping trance on me had faded, and just felt total fear. So much so that I was too afraid to move. I regained control and turned and ran as fast as I could to go tell my supervisor what was going on. I ran back to the main part of the trail, which in the area I was in was a dead end, when I began hearing something really big following close behind me. I stopped dead in my tracks and listened. That's when I heard a howl yell sound. It was powerful enough that I actually felt it, as if I was made of metal, and if I moved, I would have been destroyed. It felt very close, and I could feel the presence of something approaching me from behind. I turned around to see what it was, and there, just having stepped out of the woods behind me, stood a monstrosity of a being. It was taller than a man, had a larger head than I imagined, and the most evil-looking eyes. It was the same creature that tried to lure me away, and it didn't look remotely happy that I broke free from its trance. It followed me up this trail and just looked so angry that I didn't come to it. It had long upright ears, just like what I saw initially behind the trees, hands with long claws, and a face almost like a wolf, but uglier, if that makes any sense. I knew I was now fully seeing this thing in the flesh, whatever it was that was masked behind the trees trying to pull me in. This was the creature. It stood there, looking me up, sizing me up, eyes scanning my body up and down, as if waiting for me to make the next move, when this thing takes a step towards me. And just in that very moment, I hear the sound of somebody coming towards me. My supervisor in a golf cart. She was coming down the trail and headed this way, just around the bend. This thing turns its immediate attention to the sound of the golf cart, and then turns and looks back at me, looks back again at the approaching sound, and then in a split second darts back into the woodline on the other side of the trail, creating a massive crashing sound. I pretty much soiled my pants, and not even 10 seconds later, my supervisor pops into view. She had this surprised look on her face to see me on this part of the trail, and even stopped to ask me what I was doing here, and why I wasn't down on the other part, finishing clearing the brush. I didn't say much, but I told her I think I needed to leave, and wasn't feeling well. I could tell she wasn't buying it, but she kept telling me, "Are you sure? You do look really pale. Are you sick?" Safe to say that I left and never volunteered for wildlife services ever again after that. One night, when I was around 10 years old, my dad came home late, about 11 p.m. at night. My mother, who had fallen asleep, was lying on the couch and waiting for him to get home. My dad, upon walking up to the house, noticed something looking at him by the side door of the house and the side window. When he turned on the light on the front porch, it quickly moved out of view. I shouldn't say turned on, really. We have a motion light detector on the front porch, so when he stepped into view, this thing must have moved from the light. My dad, being on high alert, thinking it was an intruder coming into the house, and before he could say anything, my sister comes running down the hallway, white as a ghost, and said, "Dad, Mom, there's a large monster outside my window." Her bedroom window is on the far side of the house, right where the thing supposedly was. That is exactly where my dad saw it. My dad told us he was getting his rifle and grabbed it out of the closet. He opened up the back door and walked out into the darkness and screamed and fired off a shot into the sky, demanding whatever this was to show itself, or he was going to make it look like Swiss cheese. Incredibly corny, but my father gets this superhero complex about him sometimes, where I feel like he has to recite cheesy action movie lines just to quelch his fear. He shined his flashlight around, but couldn't see anything. My sister, my mom, and I were all on high alert, freaking out. My sister and dad genuinely saw something. While my dad was outside investigating the back, we heard something moving around the front yard. My mother somehow had the courage to look out in the window, and we saw it was not a person, but a large wolf-like creature that was staring right back at us through the window with these dirty, ambery yellow eyes. It looked emaciated and lifeless, sunken in face, and very slender, like it hadn't eaten in days. It looked kind of deformed and broken, but it didn't look like it was in any pain. My sister and I began to scream, and my mother rushed to the back to yell for my dad, saying it was in the front of the house. My dad comes rushing back into the house, all the way to the front of the house, and the damn thing is gone again. My sister and I ran and hid in my parents' room with a giant comforter underneath it, just like little kids. It was horrifying. My mom was freaking, and my dad probably spent the better half of the next 2 hours patrolling the entire perimeter of the outside of our house, searching for this creature, shining his flashlight at any given moment, pointing his gun. After a while, he gave up because we hadn't seen it anymore, and he went inside but kept the gun close by, just in case that it came back. He and my mom hardly slept, but they did sleep in the living room, or tried to. My sister and I fell asleep at some point, holding each other under the comforter. The following morning, and the time after, we just didn't talk about it, and I've never brought it back up as a family. My sister, however, kept asking my dad the next day, "What was that last night, Dad? What did we see? What kind of monster was that? Where did it come from?" My father refused to answer. My mom just kept changing the subject and suggested that we shouldn't discuss such things. We never had an experience like that ever, and we moved out about a year later. It's a scary memory to think back on, actually. Shortly after I had turned 21, I believe I saw a dogman. After a long weekend of partying with some friends outside of Cincinnati, I don't remember the exact location, but it was along the highway near me, and probably right along the railroad tracks adjacent to it. It was on all fours, looking over at me, and then it stopped in its tracks. It seemed like it was looking directly into my eyes, but there was this overwhelming feeling when it looked at me, a fear that took hold of me. I couldn't break away from its gaze. It really did look grotesque looking. After about a few more seconds of looking at it, I determined that this was a creature of sinister intention, a dogman. It was very humanoid looking in the face. I had to slow down to observe this thing as it stared back at me, like we were meant to make eye contact. Then I sped up, and this thing gave chase after my car. I was scared that it would catch up to me and pull me out of my vehicle, so I pressed on the gas hard until I was doing around 80 to 90 miles an hour, with this thing running behind me, nearly catching up with me. Then it just stops in the middle of the road, stands up on 2 legs, and then watches me as my car gets further and further away, creating more and more distance from this thing. I watched this all happen in my rearview mirror. Honestly, one of the freakiest things I've ever had happen to me in my entire life. I didn't know creatures like this even existed until I learned about Dogman later on in life. It's left a lasting impression on me. When friends joke about folklore and Bigfoot, I can't help but know now that there are things out there that do exist that society somehow deems as non-existent. Whenever I see creatures in the movies now, I kinda want to believe they exist, just like werewolves or dogmen. Call it whatever you want. Even with the faintest hint of a connection, I can't shake the feeling that this thing was trying to kill me. I was so scared that I still have this memory constantly. I've just accepted that it's a part of me now. I'm submitting my encounter to you because I too have had a horrifying experience with a werewolf-like creature, just as you described in many of your encounter videos. Here's mine. I have been hearing strange noises and sounds outside of our house for weeks now, on and off, before I actually saw what the cause of it was. The sounds were like a really large animal groaning outside. It was strange. My husband works late, so he doesn't get home till closer to midnight every night. One night, during the week, this thing must have walked by and ticked the motion sensor on, and that's when I saw it. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I thought at the time that if I turned on all the lights in the house, maybe it would deflect this thing from wanting to get in. My husband arrived home a little earlier that evening, and my husband was furious that all the lights were on. I never actually told him why I had all the lights on, because I don't think he would have believed me. He probably did not see what I did, because he acted very normal, but he thought I was strange for having all the lights on, and I told him the darkness was getting to me. He just kind of smirked and laughed about it, and thought I was acting very strange. This is still going on to this very day, and I don't know how to break it to him. He is a very stern, no-nonsense science kind of guy, and would believe that kind of thing, unless he thought for himself. The sounds don't appear outside of our house every single night, but they are often. It's that weird animal groaning noise. Imagine like a large animal, like a moose or horse, who has had a bad raspy smoker's cough, is giving birth, or pushing something out of its birth canal. I know, it's a bizarre description, but it's the only way I know how to describe the noise. There's a lot of strange development around here too, and we're not surrounded by woods or forest like many people who encounter these creatures are. I have no idea where it's coming from, and why it's targeting our house and us. Ever since this whole COVID-19 thing has taken place, things have gone a little crazy, and it wasn't until around April this year that this has all started happening. Maybe you can find a way to help me break it to my husband that we have a nightly visitor, a Dogman. I used to live in Maine for a while, way back in the day, when me and my neighbors all saw the largest coyote that we've ever seen in our lives. Here's the kicker though. We would often all see it walking around on its hind legs. That was enough for each of us, and we thought we were going crazy until we kept frequently seeing it. Some of us described it as a large dog or wolf, while others just described it as the largest coyote they've ever seen. Same color, same stature, same build, everything. That's how we began to notice we weren't crazy. This is how I would best describe it. The neighborhood we were in was near a heavy amount of forest, so we think this thing would come in and out of that whole area and would go through our neighborhood. We would all often see it running a nearby field that bordered the neighborhood. We had a huge amount of deer that would frequent the area, so I don't know if that had any part to play. I guess if we're talking in terms of zoology, if that is the right term, since I'm not a scientist or biologist, whatever, that would mean that the high deer population would give way for a massive food supply. So it's only natural that predators who feed off deer would be drawn to the area. But I don't recall ever seeing a cougar or anything like that, not even a mountain lion. None of us have ever had any problems with animals in the area, let alone this problem. I've listened to a few of your Dogman shows, and to my recollection, I've never had anything close to violent or terrifying with such an animal. The other neighbors that I talked to about seeing this same creature had the same conclusion I did. I think we all just realized it was there to feed on the deer, because it never tried approaching our houses or coming onto our land to do anything to us. I firmly believe it was just a large predator. We might potentially be seeing direwolves coming back to life that people are mistaking as dogmen. Maybe direwolves also just happen to walk on their hind legs too for a short time. I mean, it is very possible. Until anybody catches a live specimen of one of these things, really anything and everything is kind of just up in the air. My grandfather and my mother lived a little bit out in the countryside while she grew up. My mother was an only child, and my grandmother passed away shortly after my mother was born, so it was just the two of them, roughing it out by themselves. My grandfather had a large chicken coop, 50 chickens to be exact, and 13 acres of land in backwoods, and she was basically raised on a farm. Their house was right next to the woods, and right next to a cemetery. She absolutely loved walking to the woods around the cemetery, especially after dark. She even went so far as to walk down into the cemetery at night because she enjoyed how quiet and how spooky it got. My mother had a saying that she almost never told, but that you should always carry a light with you wherever you go, even in the daytime. On the nights when she was just a kid, probably 8 or 10, she described these eyes staring back at her from around the cemetery. Those eyes were attached to something much larger, a shadow that resembled that of a large standing dog. My mother believed for a long time that those eyes were indeed those of a werewolf. Even though it scared my mother, she still kept going down there at night because she was curious as much as she was afraid and wanted to see if she could make friends with this monster, or so she told me at the time. She tried telling her father, aka my grandfather, and he told her it wasn't a werewolf and she was just probably trying to pull his leg. My mother kept going down there after dark and seeing this large shadow moving around the cemetery, but never being brave enough to actually get close enough to talk to it. She said that she would always get too scared and end up running away. It would only ever appear there at nighttime. She tried to tell her dad several times about this being there, but he just wouldn't believe her. At one point or another, he threatened severe punishment because she was just making things up and wouldn't stop the storytelling. This is when he had a sighting all of his own. That night, my mother went to bed and he was sitting out on the porch smoking pipe tobacco when he noticed all the crickets and frogs he would normally be hearing making lots of noise around them were dead quiet. Even the chickens were quiet, and even they would sometimes be making noise. Then, out of the darkness, he saw what looked to be a tall figure standing by the trees, watching him. This figure had red eyes. All he could see was this large silhouette shadow and the eyes. It really frightened him. After that happened, the next day, he forbid my mother from ever going back down there to the cemetery after that night. My mother doesn't have much memory after that of seeing this creature again, but she did not know what it was for the longest time. I thought that werewolves were an actual real creature, she's told me. Later on in life, as more information came out about cryptids like Bigfoot, she began to believe that these were actual things that lived. Then, she started hearing about the whole Wisconsin werewolf thing, the Beast of Bray Road, etc., and all the Linda Godfrey stories and narrations. As she was able to get more and more stories from people who had seen similar creatures, she realized that this was a dogman that was visiting her. Some quick information on the cemetery that was near her house. It didn't belong to her family or anything. I believe it was just a tiny community cemetery that they just happened to live by. My mother said it was maybe a 5-minute walk at best from her back porch through some small woods. That small patch of woods was really the only thing separating the cemetery from her property. Because of where they lived and the road they lived on, that cemetery hardly if ever got any traffic and mainly belonged to the many of the older people that had passed living in the area from long before. When I tell this story to people, most just laugh and say, no, that couldn't have been a werewolf. It couldn't be a dogman, they say. But this did happen, and I saw it. For the very first time on that dark night, I played tag with my brothers. Long story short, I saw a werewolf creature coming back towards us from the woods. My younger brother saw it first. Then I saw the wolf. We all got scared and ran back to the house. At the time, there was acres and acres of undeveloped land behind our house. It's now either an apartment complex or a strip mall. Probably both. At the time, it was just a bunch of mess of overgrown weeds, blackberry bramble, and trees with those orange markings on them to signal which trees they were going to start taking out. The development of that land did not start till after we moved out, and we were there for roughly 6 years. But this particular night was when we saw what we call the werewolf, because that's what it resembled closest. We played night tag often, and never had a sighting like this before, until my younger brother saw it, just like I said. It was coming towards us slowly, like it was trying to be sneaky. I don't know what it was planning on, but it was being sneaky, and it was out in the open, which frightened all of us. Once we all saw it, we thought it was a person in a costume, but it moved wrong, and it was just way too big to be somebody dressed in a costume. We all screamed and ran back to the house. My younger brother tried telling my mom, but she didn't believe us, whereas me and my older brother kept our mouths shut and didn't say a word. This was in September, right before we were about to start school up again, and things were just starting to cool off. We didn't really go back there the rest of the school year until the following spring and summer, when we were able to play tag again at night. Never had another sighting of this creature ever again, even if it was back there in secret watching us play. When I think back on these memories, I think, what if it had grabbed one of us? Had my little brother not seen it moving out from behind a tree in the open? There's no telling what could have happened. This thing also made no noise, and it was just by luck he saw it. Probably for the better. Earlier this winter, I shot at one of these Dogman creatures with my .22 rifle. Probably an incredibly stupid idea, and I almost got myself killed. These Dogmen are scary looking, with tall ears, huge heads, and huge sets of teeth. The one I shot at was easily 8 feet tall. I shot at one of its ribs and fired another shot at its shoulders to try and deter it away from getting into my trailer. They looked like they could cut me wide open if they wanted to. I didn't care though. I wanted to get it away from my trailer. I knew a measly hollow point wasn't going to do anything to this thing, but it did seem to deter it for the time being. The next few days, I felt like I was being watched and followed everywhere I went around the outside of my trailer. This one Dogman in particular, the one I believed to be the alpha male of a pack, he was hunting me. He was large and black, the same one I had shot at that seemed to keep trying to come back behind the house. It was very muscular, broad, and honestly resembled a living killing machine. I shot at him with my .22 again, but it didn't seem to do anything to him. It wasn't even remotely bothered that I shot bullets into it. It's like the bullets didn't even do any damage. It kept its pursuit, and I hid inside my trailer for the evening. I knew it was waiting outside for me, but I never gave it the satisfaction of going outside to greet it. The following day, I started to hear strange noises and activity around my trailer. The dogs all throughout my property started to go crazy regularly that day. I could hear them trotting back and forth between my trailer and the thick woods. They had been acting strange the whole day when they were not acting strange the few nights before. Whenever these creatures were around, they knew. Oh yes, they knew. They could smell it. And these things gave off this awful scent like blood and dog. But it's worse than that. It's rotten. I can't even describe it to you. The entire day I was on edge, waiting for this thing to show itself again, as it had been. I knew it was going to. You just have this feeling in the pit of your stomach, this anxiety that something is going to happen. You just don't know when. Imagine being tied up and blindfolded, and know somebody's going to just stab you, but you never know when. I know, weird analogy, but that's the best I can come up with. I don't know why it was so headstrong on trying to break into my trailer, but it wouldn't stop. I clearly couldn't hurt this thing with the measly .22 that I had, but it was the only weapon I owned that could somewhat deter this animal and make it stop. So, I lied in wait most of the time, waiting for it to show itself again. Maybe if I shot it in the eye or something like that, it would go away. Sometimes it would be sneaky and work its way right up to my trailer by crouching. Other times it would just do a bluff charge and then disappear. This creature really liked to show itself at night, so I lied again and wait, because I know it would be more active then. This is the night where things really took off. I remember it was starting to get dark, and I began hearing a strange noise that I had not heard before outside. The moon was bright enough that I could see. It was actually a full moon, which in and of itself was eerie, considering what I was dealing with and the situation at hand. I had my .22 with me, fully loaded and ready to go. Maybe I could shoot this thing in the face and get it to go away once and for all, but I wasn't too hopeful. My dogs were quiet, which was a good sign, because they've always gotten kind of anxious anytime these things are in the area. So I walked outside to see if I could see what was making the noise I was hearing. That's when I realized I walked right into the middle of a damn trap. And then I saw a pair of eyes that were staring right back at me. That's when the situation that I was in turned from mild to absolute horror. Then I began seeing multiple sets of eyes all around me and all around the trailer. There had to have been at least 12 of them, and as my eyes began to adjust, I could see more coming. All of my dogs were dead and were being feasted upon by these creatures. That's why they hadn't made a sound. I just dropped my gun right there and ran back into the trailer and locked the door. There was no way that crappy little gun was going to do anything against a horde of these things. I started to have a panic attack, not knowing what to do or what I was going to do to face these things. Then these things started getting rowdy. I heard growling, howling. They started charging into the trailer, knocking me off my feet, scratching on the windows and the siding. They were just toying with me at this point, like a sadistic monster. These creatures were easily strong and large enough that they could break in if they wanted to. It's like I was an injured or poisoned mouse, with a bunch of cats playing with me, right before they were going to eat me. I was sure that this was the end of it, that I was going to be eaten alive and torn into pieces by large werewolf-looking creatures. But something bizarre happened. About 20-30 minutes goes by, and the commotion stops. Everything outside was silent. I didn't even hear the crickets. It was just dead. I stayed inside my trailer the rest of the night, and I did not get a drop of sleep. I wasn't sure if they were baiting me, waiting for me to step out, giving me a false sense of security while waiting for me. I wasn't going to step out into that trap though, not like I did the first time. I'm pretty sure they were baiting me and trapping me. I knew the second I would have stepped foot outside that trailer, they would have grabbed me, and bam, I would have been gone. So, I sat in that trailer for what felt like an entire month, even though it had only been 9 hours. As soon as the daylight began to break, I got outside, stepped out, and to my horror, there were no dog carcasses like I thought there were going to be. Just torn chains where I had them, and blood everywhere. It was like a slaughterhouse. I had about 8 dogs that I kept around me to keep safe. They were all gone. Some might call this next move drastic, but I felt like I was in a dire situation of life or death, and so I just stopped and abandoned everything I owned in that trailer and hitchhiked to an entirely different state and remained homeless for a while. Sure, I took my wallet, my identity, important information like that, but I said screw it and left what little belongings I had in that trailer to rot with those monsters. That was just this winter, and I hope to stay far away from anything like those things again. Alright, look, I'm already extremely paranoid just listening to your channel as it is, let alone submitting what I want to send to you. Because of that, I don't want to give away the exact location of which this is happening, but I will say the state of Mississippi is in dire need of help. Over the last several years, people have been being found mauled to death or just turned up missing entirely when they were last seen around a heavily wooded area. I think you know where this is going, and what I have to say is that I'm pretty sure there is a large cover-up going on. I'm more than sure that you are aware of this from all the encounters you probably receive, but it's getting worse. Sure, how do I know this? Because a couple of the people that have been killed so far have been family of mine, because the only thing I've been told so far is that it is an unidentifiable canine animal. Well, let me tell you something right now. There is no ravenous wolf just running around killing and eating people. Not the size of a damn moose. The police know well what's going on, and they're choosing to keep it under wraps. I don't know anything about proper protocol or what they do and how they keep it under control, but they're doing it, and people are being left in the dark purposefully. People need to be warned about this kind of thing. They need to know that these creatures exist and that they are out there. It's not safe to go into the woods alone anymore. Just a few months ago, shortly after quarantine set in, there was an older gentleman who lives near right by me. He went fishing at a pond who somehow vanished. All they found was his fishing pole and his fishing vest that was bloody and torn up. Ready? They found it about 1.5 miles away from the pond, towards the thicker wilderness. You tell me what happened there. He would have no reason to go further into the woods, which only leads to more national forest. I'm telling you, there is some huge conspiracy at hand here, and I don't know exactly what it is, or why they're trying to cover this whole Dogman thing, but it's been really bothering me lately, and I feel that it's my place to speak out. I hope you decide to read this to your listeners, because I want them to know that it's getting worse. They need to be vigilant and hypersensitive to their surroundings around them if they choose to be out in the woods. We need to stop this nonsense of writing Dogman off as fake creepypasta crap. People are out here dying and getting mauled to death by these things because the general public refuses to accept the truth. As far as Bigfoot goes, I don't know anything about that, and I don't have any personal experience with Bigfoot. From everything I've learned cryptozoology-wise, they're much more docile, gentle beings. But that's besides the point. You wouldn't be hearing about a large unknown predator eating people if it was Bigfoot out there doing this. And I don't know if you know this, but Mississippi is kind of a hotbed for these creatures. If you've ever heard of the town of Taylor, Mississippi, well, they are plagued by these creatures. They call it the Rougarou down here, but I know it's also known as a Dogman. I stand firm in my knowledge of cryptozoology and what these creatures are, and I know they are out there. You will never find me out there in the woods alone, because I don't trust that a pistol, a magnum, a machine gun will be enough to stop these things from killing you. I don't know if they are born or put together by the government, or natural or supernatural. I don't care. All I know is that they are killing people, and something has to be done to stop them. The police and government are working together to make sure this happens, and that any word gets out is hush hush. Before I end this, I don't want this just to be a rant. I need to go into more detail about my 2 family members that were murdered. They were found partially eaten, and what the police report described was a large canine. A known large canine. Now, you tell me what you think, knowing all that you do with all of the encounters and stories you get sent. Please, I'm begging you. I want you to read this to your viewers. People need to know this is going on, and it's severe. I'm hurting, and I'm trying to mourn right now for the loss of my family, because these damn things are not being taken care of the way they need to be. Pray for me, listen to me, take warning. If you're going to go out there in the woods at all, whether you are exploring or indulging in recreational activities, you need to be heavily armed to the teeth and watching your back at any given moment. From what I know, these things are highly advanced predators. They are masters of camouflage, incredibly intelligent, and if you think you can outsmart them because they are a quote-unquote animal, well, you're highly mistaken. Anyway, thank you for taking the time to read this. I went for a jog one morning on a nearby trail near where I live, and I came across a series of footprints in the soft clay-like mud. The mud was soft and fairly hard, but had a fairly uniform thickness. Each print consisted of 3 long toes, with a stride around 1 meter. I'd guess the tracks were between 15 inches in length. I'd guess the creature was around 6 feet tall. Neither the stride length nor the number of toes was necessarily normal for any creature, considering it only had 3 long toes, which would lead me to believe it could have been a large bird. But they didn't follow any known animal pattern for toes. It looked very reptilian-like. That to me struck me as odd, because even though this trail was used very much, there are no large lizards out here to my knowledge. And just like that, in that very moment, I saw a flash of quick movement of something large and black nearby in the trees. I saw the back of its head and shoulders move from behind the tree to cross a trail parallel and below me. I got scared and felt like I was in danger. I started hearing a hissing sound and something big moving in the brush. Then, I had the strangest experience I've probably ever had in my life. For the first time, I experienced telepathic communication. No, not like a psychic or something. This was words from something else projected into my own mind. Whatever being was just beyond the trees that I could not see was communicating to me through thoughts. It told me in a dark and deepened voice I needed to leave now and was not welcome in this area. I want you to know that in that moment, it was 100% terrifying. More terrifying than anything you could utterly imagine. I've always wondered about Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster, ghosts, anything that goes bump in the night. And in that moment, I believed that there truly was something more than what I perceived to be in reality. I felt had I stuck around longer, I would have been eaten by whatever this creature was. It started stepping towards me as I hesitated, and that's when I ran back all the way up the trail. I wasn't about to piss this creature off, whatever it was. I'm still scared about it to this day. To give you more accurate details of what I could see through the trees, it had really long arms. They were kind of gangly looking. It was kind of slouched over. It looked to be scaly and really dark in color. It was about 20 yards away from me, and it freaked me right out, especially when it started hissing at me, kind of like a large snake does. That was enough for me. I was a student at Texas Tech at the time. Me and my friends would go out at night during the summer months and hang out in this large lake nearby with many cattails, as lakes have. We would just sit there and listen to the bugs and insects and watch the fireflies and enjoy the peace. That's all until one evening that this mysterious creature none of us have ever seen before came into full view that shook all of our realities to a new level. We had no idea something like this could even begin to exist. Out of the water nearby emerged a serpent-looking creature that stood upright on 2 legs, was stark white, and had the large head of a snake with teeth. It appeared to have a snout as well. It was a very odd-looking creature to behold. All of us, including my friends, were freaking out, trying to hush each other in hopes this thing would not turn and notice that we were watching it. It just walked off into the cattails and out of view. If I had to give estimates, I would say it was no shorter or taller than us, being around 6 feet, but it was pale white and very serpent-looking. It had a long snout on its face and full of sharp teeth. I didn't catch any eyes, but it had a long tail that dragged behind it and claws on its hands and feet. It walked perfectly upright, just like a man does. It didn't even seem like it was unnatural for this creature to walk like that at all. We were really scared. This was really close to us, but since we ducked out of view, I don't think it noticed that we were there. I don't know if I should call it a snake man, lizard man, or what, but I can tell you it was really freaky looking. I don't like to talk about this much, but I remember the day very clearly. It was early in the morning. I was loading grain into the tractor, and there was a storm approaching. My brother, who was helping, got in the truck and got to the barn. The barn was on the highway close by, but still a part of our general area of land. Very few homes around, and not many other farms, so there was seldom traffic. I was probably about 15 or 16 feet in front of the tractor. It was very bright out that morning. The tractor lights were on as well. I was a bit of a wildcat, and was out looking for any nearby bucks I could see that would break through and walk through this area to get to a large pond just on the other side of a small bunch of woods nearby. In that moment, there was a loud snapping sound. It sounded like massive branches being broken. And then as I looked over, I could see it wasn't a buck emerging. This dark, big lizard man-looking thing stepped out from behind the trees and seemed to be scouting its surroundings. It was way too big to be a person. I mean really big. From the distance I could see its muscles flexing, and there was no way it was a person in a lizard suit. It looked scary and very large. It was ripped and had muscles and a very reptile-looking face and head. Estimated distance was maybe 100 feet away from me, but I saw it at an angle where it did not see me, thank God. It took a couple of steps and then turned around. I carry walkie-talkies with my brother, and since he was in the truck, immediately radioed to him and said to my brother, "What the hell was that? Did you see that?" He, of course, didn't answer the way I wanted him to. He hadn't seen it as I did. It disappeared back into the trees very quickly, like it did not want to be exposed for very long. I remember thinking how lucky I was that whatever this creature was did not notice me or even act aggressively towards me or at the presence of me. I have never forgotten that day and pray that I never ever see that thing again. It was a beautiful summer night, and I was on my back porch, which overlooks a small segment of woods, smoking a fine cigar and reflecting on the events of the day. The sun had not fully set just yet, so in the dusk of night, there was still just a pinch of visibility. Plus, I had a few or more lights around my house, so I could see besides just my porch light. Well, I happened to glance up to the right of the woods when I caught a flash of something brown looking, or maybe black, that was very close to the house. I thought at first it might have been a deer, except a deer doesn't resemble anywhere close to the shape that I saw, or the size. My first glance, I thought it was some big tall person in maybe a reptile suit or something. Maybe I was hallucinating, but it moved very quickly. When I first tried to get a better look at it, it appeared to have darted onto the other side of the house where I could not see it. I was not prepared to see what I did shortly, so I stayed standing still, fearing it could be a cougar or a mountain lion at first, and maybe, hopefully I was just seeing things. I have to say at this point, I was a bit shaken up by the initial shape that I saw. I got the feeling in my gut that perhaps this thing wanted to get into my house or to get to me. I did not get a view of it from where I stood, and it wasn't until I actually decided to move off the porch and around to the side of my house, after a few minutes, that I saw this creature in full view. Even though I had caught a quick glimpse of this thing, I still tried to rationalize with myself it was just a cougar, and I was making all of it up in my head. I was thoroughly scared beyond my wits at the sight before me. The first thing I noticed was just how very muscular this creature was. It reminded me of a boxer with powerful long arms. I was looking at a humanoid iguana-looking creature standing there on two human-like legs and a face that kind of resembled an alligator mixed with a gecko. I dropped my cigar in that moment in sheer terror, and this thing turned around and looked at me. It towered over me. It had to have been easily 9 feet, if not maybe a little more. This beast was giant. It ranged from a smoky green color to black, and the front of its body appeared to be lighter in color, but had smooth scales all over it. It looked kind of slimy. It had very long fingers with claws at the end of them. Think kind of like an iguana does, where it has overly exaggerated long fingers and claws. That's what it looked like. It just stared at me in the eyes for a few moments, and then turned back around and walked off into the trees in the direction of the swamp and wetlands. I ran inside immediately and called the police. About halfway through the call with the operator, I somewhat came to my senses and just hung up on them, because I felt like common sense came to me, and I realized they're not going to believe me, even if I told them exactly what I saw. I ran over to my desk and grabbed my small pistol, just in case this thing decided to come back. My speculation is that from the area it came from, there's about 8 or so miles of thick marsh and swampland before it goes back into more thick pine forest. It's very close by, and that's the general direction it came from. Look, I have no idea for sure if it came from the marshes, but it also went back in that direction. There is nothing out there that I know of, and I wasn't waiting around for this thing to come trotting back around. I was not hesitant to be able to put a bullet or two in this thing, or 3. The question is, what would that even do, if anything? I sat around and waited, and it never did come back. Look, I'm usually not the one for toting around the whole swamp monster rhetoric, but where the hell does a 9-foot-tall, humanoid reptile even come from? Long ago, back in the late 90s, I had acquired this old property with a big worn-down barn on it through a short sale, and the house itself was in need of much work, a little dilapidated to say the least. Little did I know there was a good reason that this property had long been forgotten about. The property itself was not in terrible shape, but to my knowledge, there had not really been any people living on it for years. I guess that was kind of evident due to its condition. This place was actually on the outskirts of the town that I lived in, and since I'd been coming out there regularly to make this place look nice, I was planning on fixing it up and probably trying to resell it for some profit. For the record, I am a 52-year-old male and have never been involved with any sort of strange activity. Until this anyway. Every time I was near the back side of this house where the barn was, I would get this bad feeling, like it was impending doom. I would hear things in the bushes and in the trees at night when I was on the porch, and I would just kind of stop when I got closer to investigate. I would sometimes hear what sounded like a really large dog sniffing the air. It was bizarre. I would never go outside in certain areas because I would feel like there's somebody there. Some sort of presence that would be watching every step that I was making. I knew there was more to it than that though, because there had been strange noises and activity around that area, long before I ever acquired the piece of land with the dilapidated house and barn on it. I've heard multiple stories of people and neighbors in the area about weird things going on, but I really never paid attention to such hogwash. Of course, until I myself actually experienced it there. One evening, I was working late on the back porch, and it got really bad. You know that primal instinct of fear? How when it just washes over you, it grabs you, it takes hold of you. I had this horrible feeling creep up all around me. I don't have any other answer for it, but the closest I can tell you is that the thought of I'm being hunted right now by something kept popping up into my head. I felt like I was in danger and I needed to leave. I had stepped inside the house to grab some more tools, and I think I just left the door open for maybe 5 minutes while I was in there. I don't know what it was, but I began to hear something big moving towards and closer to the house, like a really big animal or something. I did hear the distinct sound of something big running from the brush towards the house that I don't know where it came from exactly, but it was coming toward where I was, just walked by the back door. I didn't know what it was or what it was planning, but it didn't feel right. I remember stopping and turning towards the door, expecting whatever was going to barge right through the open doorway. I never had fear overtake me like that, ever. Not like it did in that moment. I almost felt like I had to do my best not to have a literal mental breakdown right then and there. It sounded like a damn moose charged out of the bush toward the porch, and then all noise ceased. Every single one. I sat there listening with my hands still on my tools, listening for anything. The crickets had even gone quiet. It was total silence. I heard a very faint raspy breathing, very heavy. Not like a person, but something with a very heavy and large set of lungs. Whatever it was, it felt like it was waiting for me to step back out on the porch where I was drilling and nailing. I fled out the front door as quickly and quietly as I could, jumping in my truck and getting out of Dodge quickly. It was weeks before I even felt comfortable returning back to the property that I had just recently acquired. In the coming weeks after that incident, I had horrible nightmares of this wolf creature breaking in the house, grabbing me, and pulling me away into the woods, never to be seen again. And then, my nightmare would end. It was the same one, reoccurring over and over every night. This creature in my nightmares resembled some hideous, upright walking wolf creature. I guess you would call that a werewolf. The sheer amount of noise it made from running over the brush to the house, the weight that it had, I knew this was a large animal. It terrified me enough that I had a hard time returning. Anyway, when I finally did return, I did it in the morning hours that were filled with visibility and daylight. The outside of the house reeked like dog urine, really strong. It was in that moment I realized my nightmares were coming to life. I just remember thinking that this can't be possible. How is it I've been having these lucid nightmares of this werewolf-type creature, and now I'm smelling a strong dog urine all around the house? Like this creature came out of the woods, and has now marked this house as its property, its territory. It freaked me out far too much to want to continue to work on this piece of land like I had been. So, I hired a small 3-man crew to go out there and finish the work for me for the next couple of months. I would periodically check up on them, ask them if they felt anything weird while they were working, and they would just give me weird looks and tell me no. Clearly, they had no idea what I was talking about. This put me on edge even more. I felt like whatever I had encountered that night was targeting me as an individual. It wanted me, whatever it was. It wasn't interested in these younger guys I had hired, nor the house. It was waiting for me to come back to show itself, or so I believe. It isn't going to give it the benefit of the satisfaction of terrorizing me. I think I came to terms with my nightmares being a reality, that this thing was real and was terrorizing me in my dreams. I ended up selling the place shortly after I got them to finish up on the house, and cut things short, in turn taking a much smaller profit. But I didn't want to deal with it anymore, if we're entirely honest. Afterward, I never had any of these nightmares again. Never felt any of the strange and terrifying sensations I did when I first stepped foot on that place. That was nearly 20 years ago, and I want to keep those memories as far in the past as I can keep them. Thanks for listening. Before I go into detail, let me explain a little bit about the area so you can fully understand how this happened. My grandfather's corn stalks lined right up against the road that ran parallel with his corn. On the other side of that road, there is a road that meets and intersects perpendicular that ran right into the parallel road. On one side of this perpendicular road was corn stalks that were owned by another family, and then on the other side of that road was heavier woods. Here, just think of an upside down capital T. The flat part of the T was my grandfather's corn stalks. On one side was the last woods, and on the other was the corn. I'm just trying to give you a visual that makes the most sense. Now, when I was really little, my grandfather owned acres and acres of a cornfield that I would play in all the time. One afternoon, I was stopping to look at a big bug that I had never seen before, while my grandfather was pulling a trailer with all of his corn stalks and grain in it. I noticed some movement coming from across the road, and I turned to see what it was. My grandfather saw it too, since he was right there, and motioned to me that he thought it was going to be a big buck and would emerge from the woods across the road. He pointed to where the movement was, and that's when we saw this large hyena-looking creature that was walking around on its hind legs, emerging out of the woodline. When I saw it, it turned its head and met my eyes. Then it leapt and jumped and landed into the corn stalks on the opposite side of the road. In one jump, it cleared the road. As it had leapt into the cornfield on the other side, I panicked. I jumped up onto the trailer, and I waved my arms trying to get my granddad's attention, who looked and saw it too. Then the creature emerged from the corn again. It stopped, looked back at me. Then it turned to the side and walked off on its hind legs, going back into the woods where it just came from, instead of leaping like it did before. It looked like it was holding a small animal in its arms. Perhaps it had chased a cat or something into the corn and was retrieving it when we had just happened to be right across the road from it. This thing didn't take long to cross from one area of the corn to the woods. I knew it was out there in the open, exposing itself. It was smart. It acted intelligently. I had never seen a creature like that before in my life. Gosh, it was so giant. I've never seen an animal so large before, other than large bear and moose, especially one that was walking on its hind legs, just like a person does. It didn't act awkward or uncomfortable walking on its hind legs. It was like it was fluid and natural. I can't overstate to you how massive this creature was. When I saw it for the first time coming out of the woods into the corn, I saw that it was well over 8 feet tall and had a long muzzle covered in black. My grandfather is 6'4", and this thing towered over him. I could just tell from being how far away it was from it. I felt traumatized. I know that even if it took me a couple of years to get over this experience, I would really never truly be the same again. I was terrified. I haven't gotten over this since the day, and haven't fully processed it, even all these years later. My grandfather who saw it wouldn't talk to me about it, and he just sits in complete denial that these things exist. I don't need to see one to believe them anymore. I know they exist now. Driving home one afternoon from a dentist appointment when I decided to take a long way home to head through a backcountry area that's primarily all old native territory. There wasn't much back here, truth be told, but the scenery was beautiful. That's when I had the sighting of my life happen to me. I almost hit a big black dog. I saw this figure run in front of my car. It was running upright, just like a person, and looked just like a werewolf. I stopped the car and just sat there gaping at it as it ran across the road quickly. I never did see something like that before in my life. I slowly started to move again after it crossed when I got about 300 yards away from where it crossed. I could see in my rearview mirror that it was looking back and peering its head back out at my vehicle. That dog was huge. It was nearly 8 feet tall, had pointed ears, a long snout, and a huge chest. When it crossed and jumped down the embankment on the road, it let out a growl unlike any I've ever heard. I could feel the vibrations in my body. It was so intimidating. I couldn't stop thinking about this sighting until I reached my house. I told my husband about what had happened, and he told me to never go through that area again, that it was supposed to be a cursed place of dark magic, and that people have gone missing after going to that area. Lots of strange things have gone on in that area, besides just missing persons. Weird loud metallic banging sounds, bright lights at night, figures moving in the sky in the woods. I guess that entire area is a hotbed for UFO sightings and encounters, among even Bigfoot sightings, I guess. My husband, who has grown up here in the area, where I haven't been growing up here, him and his friends avoided that area like the plague because people he knew went through there and turned out missing. Even many of the natives that live around here don't venture through that area much. Just kind of makes you wonder, I probably should have never driven through there, but oh well. I'm kinda glad I did, because had I not, I would have not seen such a marvel of an animal, if you could even call it that. Personally, I don't believe in werewolves or creatures like Bigfoot, but I do believe that there are monsters out there. In fact, I have a story that I could share with you, in which I have an experience with a monster all of my own. It was one night when I was left home by myself playing video games while my parents were out, and a monster, what I would believe to be a monster, tried to break into my house. I use the term monster because that's the only way I know how to accurately describe the way it looked and its behavior. In reality, it closely resembled that of a werewolf, but I try to be logical about it, and I realize that werewolves aren't necessarily real. I personally don't believe that there are people turning into these things under a full moon, but I cannot deny that the thing that I saw that night, that thing, a monster, was most certainly real, and had it gotten into my house like it wanted to, there is no telling if I would still be here today to tell you my story. All around our house we had a yard, and then beyond that, on both sides and the back, was probably about 3 acres of small woods, which then led directly to a neighbor's house. Directly in front of the house was the driveway that led to the road, and on the other side of the road were tall hedges. Had we not had as much privacy, and maybe were closer to the neighbors, just maybe this wouldn't have happened. Anyway, this happened to me when I was 15 and still in high school. I was a freshman, so I believe I was either 14 or 15 actually. My parents went out for a date night, and when they did, they usually did not get back until super late, like after midnight. So I was left at home to play video games and watch TV. You know, stuff that typical teenagers do. Since my parents have a large screen TV in the living room, I think I hooked up my PS3 and was playing games through that. I'll give you a quick layout of our house. As soon as you walk in the front door, the TV is directly to your right, facing your left. To your left is the couch, which faces the TV, and there's a large window perpendicular to the front door. From the outside, if you were to look in this front window, you have full view of the living room, as well as the dining area, which sits back behind the living room. If you're in the living room and you walk past the TV, you can go right down the small hallway, which leads to my parents' room and a small bathroom, and my father's office. If you turn left and go down that way, you go down another small hallway, which leads to my bedroom and a small bathroom. The bedroom is on the other side of the living room. So if I'm in my bedroom and I was facing where the TV is in the living room, there's a wall there. Going back to the living room, as soon as you walk in the front door, directly in front of you is the dining room, and in the kitchen curves inward, blocked by a wall. Now that you kinda know what the house is like, this is what happened. I stopped playing games and I quickly got up to go get a drink of water, and as I'm walking back from the kitchen, I noticed something I didn't before. I see big red eyes peering at me through the window at night. When I saw those eyes, I just lost it. I turned around and I ran, and I locked myself in my bedroom. I was freaking out. I felt like a little kid who had just seen a monster outside. When I went inside though, I started looking through the blinds just a little bit. I didn't want to move the blinds that much because I knew that it knew where I was, so I didn't want to move the window blinds. Then I saw it again. This time, it followed the movement. It followed me to where my bedroom was, and it noticed that I had gone into the next bedroom over and moved over in the front of my window. Because of its big silhouette, this thing must have been around 7 to 8 feet tall. It had a long tail which curled up behind it. I really couldn't believe what I was looking at. I thought to myself it was a werewolf even before I saw it in full. The shape gave it away. Crappy for me, but I had broken my window blinds months ago by wrestling too much with my friends, and I hit it, and my parents never bothered to replace it because they were mad. So they didn't close quite all the way, which meant that this thing had free rein to fully look into my windows right at me, and there was virtually nothing I can do but try and hide out of the way in the corner. I had my light off, and I was hiding in the corner while this thing scanned my room, looking for me. I really couldn't believe what I was looking at. I thought it was a werewolf, even before I saw it in full, just by its silhouette alone. The head and its mane looked just like a werewolf you would see. It looked to be huge, and it stood upright on two legs. It was covered in long dark fur, almost like a matted fur, and it had pointed ears just like a dog does. The eyes glowed red, like a deep dull red, and even had a hint of yellow. Its face was what really confused me, because the way it looked totally defied understanding. It leaned in so close to the glass that you could see its breath on the window and the condensation building up. I don't think it could see me, because I turned my light off, but after a few moments, it pulled its head back and walked around to the other side of my house. This thing was heavy, and you could tell that it weighed a lot, because every time it took a step, you could just hear this dull thud on the ground. I jumped up quickly, locked my door, and ran back and sat in the corner, listening intently for whatever this thing was going to do next. I could faintly hear my game, which was paused, and then it was silent for a moment. I kept listening, and then that's when I heard the back sliding glass door rattling. To my horror, this thing was trying to open the sliding glass door to get in the house. It was shaking it harder and harder, more and more violent each time. I began to cry. I was so scared. I left my phone out in the living room, so I had nothing I could do, nobody I could reach out to or call. I didn't know what to do. At the time, it was maybe 9:45 p.m., and my parents wouldn't be home for a few more hours. I had no way to contact anybody, nothing I could do. If this thing broke into the house, I was a goner. It tried and tried at the door for a while, before just stopping entirely. I didn't hear anything anymore after that. I didn't even hear it walk away like I could hear it walk all the way around the house. I still heard my game, which was just a fainted noise, but it was still sitting there paused, just like I had left it. I decided I was just going to sit there and wait until my parents got back. I didn't know how long it was, but eventually, my mother and father came home. It was only around 11 p.m., but felt like I had been sitting there waiting for hours. They got back because my mother has this habit of coming down with terrible migraines, and she wanted to cut their date shorter. When my mother and father came home, my mother got some aspirin, and they were both wondering why I had locked myself in my bedroom with the lights off, when I told them that I thought I heard an intruder trying to break into the house. My father looked at me very strangely and investigated the back door, where I told him that I had heard somebody trying to break in, but there was no signs, no footprints or smudges on the glass. It's like I just hallucinated the whole thing. I know what I saw, and I know what I experienced. I am no fool, and I wouldn't dare tell my parents this because they would never believe me. Now, fast forward in time, I'm in my 20s and currently enrolled in college, and that is still one of the most horrific things. I didn't believe in monsters before that, but I do now, and I know for a fact they are real. I've never really been one to buy into the whole Skinwalker nonsense that's talked about frequently in the Navajo culture, as well as just hearing it in the general southern United States area. But I have something that genuinely happened to me that's really left me terrified. Let me explain this to you. I was driving in the later evening in southern Arizona, far away from any Indian reservation to my knowledge. This is one of the things that is a red flag in my head, because it just doesn't make any sense. I guess I realize that they're everywhere in this region and don't pertain to one specific reservation. So, I'm driving, and there's no other cars on the road at this time. It's getting pretty dusk, so the sun is setting. By the way, if you have ever been in Arizona during a sunset, it is absolutely gorgeous. Just saying. That's really the only positive side note to this entire story. I'm coming up to a bend in the road, or should I say a bend in the hill, when I go up it and over, and blocking the road up ahead is probably what I can make out to be around 6 or 7 coyotes, just sitting there in the middle of the road, facing my oncoming vehicle. What the hell? I whispered to myself. Why are there these coyotes sitting there in the middle of the road, blocking it? But as I pull closer, I realize something is horribly wrong. Not only are these coyotes much larger in size than your average coyote, but they all looked terrible. They were disfigured, emaciated. They looked like they had a terrible case of mange, and they all looked deformed. Before I even came to a stop, I got a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach, and I felt like I needed to turn around and leave in that instant. There is nobody else on this road, so of course all 6 or 7 of these things turn around and their attention towards me. That's what I noticed something even more unnerving. All of them have solid white eyes. No iris, no pupils, nothing. There was nothing animalistic about them, and that feeling in the pit of my stomach grew worse and worse each second that I sat in this situation. I hadn't even fully stopped the vehicle before I quickly swerved the vehicle in a 180 fashion and hauled out of there. I can't say for certain that this was a pack of skinwalkers, but I just find it very weird that you have a pack of 7 of them, all looking deformed and covered in mange and emaciated looking. Gosh, they looked so grotesque, and in a small group like that, there's no explaining it. When I pulled up to them, they all had their heads down, but still facing in my direction. And like I said, they all turned up to face me in unison. The way they turned their heads to look at me right in the face was just beyond creepy. They weren't even looking at my car though, and even though I had my headlights on, they were looking right through my windshield, directly at my face. I could feel it. I sensed they were looking into my soul. Man, did that not give me the heebie-jeebies. And even as I type this out, it's making me relive that horrible memory. Now, I get freaked out every time I'm driving down there, which I still do frequently because I have many family and friends that live in the area. I've heard all sorts of weird stuff that goes on in the desert, like UFOs, alien abductions, weird stuff like that, but I never in my life would have imagined skinwalkers trying to stop me in the middle of the road. Like I said, it may have just been a coincidence, but I don't think I would have got that feeling in my gut had it just been a pack of regular coyotes. There was just something so off about all of it. I trust my gut instinct when it tells me there's something wrong. And boy, my entire body was just screaming at me to get out of there. Anyway, I hope this email isn't too long for you to read, but I just wanted to share with you my skinwalker experience, or what I believe to be a skinwalker experience. Stay out of Arizona if you can. It's not meant for people like us. So, a couple of my family friends have some Navajo in them. I'll call her Sarah for the sake of her identity being shared. Sarah is a close friend of mine and is fully Caucasian. Her husband, whom I'll call Mark, is full-blooded Navajo. We live up here in the Pacific Northwest, and his parents are from the reservation. They came up here when he was much younger, and he pretty much grew up here with them, and they eventually moved back to the res full-time. He was old enough that he decided to stay up here and start his life while they still lived and moved back down there. Every once in a while, Sarah and Mark still go down there and visit his family, who again are full-blooded Navajo. Mind you, they are very enriched in their culture and very religious in their Navajo traditions. Sarah has had plenty of skinwalker stories, and she even recites them by their actual name, which I will not repeat for the sake of my own protection. Silly or not, I don't care what anybody thinks after the story Sarah told me. I don't want to be at the mercy of these things. Even though she has shared with me several, I'll recount to you one that really sticks out to me. Sarah and Mark had gone down for a week to go visit his family, and if you didn't know, there's virtually zero cell service down there in that reservation. In fact, I think there's a special cell phone service that's meant just for the res. I digress. So, she's down there at night, smoking a cigarette, and her whole family is telling her that's a bad idea. If you throw the butt of the cigarette down, these things will come. I can't remember off the top of my head what Sarah did, but she attracted one of these things, because later on, when she went to bed, it came. It came up to the house, and she said that you could feel its energy approaching. She told me it was the most eerie, scary sensation she has ever felt. And this is a girl who grew up in a house filled with poltergeist. She said she fell into a sleep-like state, or trance, have you, and had horrible nightmares that this black, smoky vapor shape flew into her bedroom through the window and clung to her ceiling and took shape of a demon and terrorized her for the entire night. The very next morning, all of Mark's family was doing rituals and prayer to ward off this skinwalker that she had invited to come to the house, even though it was an accident. They take these situations very seriously because to them, a skinwalker isn't just some mysterious cryptid creature that walks up and terrorizes a random family. These things will hunt family members down and cause ill luck and misfortune to happen, even as far as casting spells on good people, making them sick and ruining their lives. They are dangerous beings of darkness. Sarah told me it's true. They are crawling all over the res, and you just have to be aware of the things you do and say to not draw them near. It's also very common for people just coming out of the reservation that are not familiar with tradition to accidentally attract these creatures and to bring bad luck and misfortune upon themselves in the process. So, I want to start off this email by saying that I'm not too familiar with really any of the areas in New Mexico, so I can't fully recall exactly where I was. At the time, I drove a 1998 Honda Civic. It was a piece of crap. And of course, out of all the times it decided to poop out was when I was on this smaller road. And it was while I was driving semi-cross country. It was a hot day, so first the AC went out, then the car went out, and here I am, stuck in the New Mexico desert, and I have to walk my happy ass through a very small stretch of desert because the road I was on was leaving in the total opposite direction. Luckily for me though, I still had signal, and my GPS worked, so I figured I would just walk through a few miles through the small sections of desert to go run to the needed area to get help. Here's where things get weird. Off to my left was a small bluff that I did not notice right away, or at least noticed what was on it. I began to feel like I was being watched and got a really uncomfortable feeling. I shake it off at first, thinking the heat in the sun is probably just getting to me because I'm not used to this kind of heat. I'm looking around, and I happen to turn and notice this dark figure watching me from on top of this smaller bluff. I'm not terribly far away from it, so I can make out some details, although they are minor. It looked like a very slim, slender thing. A being in black, torn, tattered robes from what I can describe. Whoever or whatever it was had a large animal skull on top of their head, with horns. They were covered from head to toe in this black, dirty, tattered robe, so I couldn't exactly see who it was or what was watching me. But when I mean they were slender, I mean like really slender, stick thin. I'm talking Ethiopian starving and haven't eaten in 3 weeks slender. It was unnatural, and it really gave me the creeps. So I kept on walking, but this person thing just kept watching me the entire time. I would be periodically checking over my shoulder to see if this freak was watching me, and at one point or another, it was gone. This made me feel even more nervous now, like this person was going to pursue me and chase me, so I quickly tried to pick up my pace and double time it. I don't know who this was, or what their intentions were, or why they were watching me so closely, but I was not comfortable being their Truman Show entertainment. The only thing I really know about the desert is that there's Las Vegas and of course Area 51, where all sorts of creepy, freaky stuff happens. Oh, I forgot about the Roswell crash. In fact, I don't even think I was more than 50 to 100 miles away from that area, if I'm not mistaken. Either way, screw what happened here. I didn't want any part to play. I eventually made it the 4-mile trek and made it to where I needed to go get help for my Honda Civic. But that was probably one of the creepiest times I can ever recall happening in my life. There is an upside though. I'm very thankful that this happened to me at 1 p.m. in the afternoon. I can't imagine, nor do I even want to think about it, had this happened to me if it was after 10, or at night when it's totally pitch black outside. I think I probably just would have called for somebody to pick me up, or waited for hours or something for an Uber. I'm never walking through the desert at night, let alone during the day anymore. Especially after something like this is happening. You can count me out. I'm gonna be honest. Before this happened, when it comes to Bigfoot, I have been very skeptical, because there's not enough evidence that would make me even consider that there could be a Bigfoot. It was about 8:15 in the morning. I was just driving the car. I was on 1st Avenue, and I had gotten off I-55. I was heading over to visit my mother at her job. I was driving near Zoo Woods, which is some sort of forest area. I was driving, and I was on the phone. I looked to my right, and I saw something very, very tall, like between 8 and 9 feet, hairy. It was running through the woods. I remembered the sun reflecting off its outside of the fur, and it gave it like an orange tint. A golden retriever has hair that color. Make it a little darker and with a little more copper tone, more redhead feel to it. I think that would be the color I am trying to accurately describe. I stopped in mid-traffic, put my hazards on, and I pulled over right away. I had just seen something moving through the trees. 9 foot tall, orange fur. It just kind of ran through about 5 feet of brush. The trees were moving. I saw it. I slammed on my brakes, got out of my car, put my hazards on. I ran over to where I saw it, because I had already passed by it. I had to run back a little bit to go in the area where I saw it. There were broken tree branches. I couldn't see any prints, no fur, no evidence besides the broken trees. There was a terrible odor, like a musky, wet dog smell. Maybe worse than that, more putrid smelling. It was like if you're running through the woods, and you are 9 feet tall, and you're about 10 feet into the woods before the outside of the woods stops. That's how far into the woods it was. It had arms, and it was running, and it was very big. I only told a couple of people, and then I let it go. In 1968, September, last part, a friend of mine and I were trying to find a place that 2 girls we met had invited us up for the night, somewhere east of Carpentersville. From looking at the maps from today, it would seem like we were lost in what is now Barrington Hills, or somewhere around there. This is in Illinois. Lots of woods and nothing else. We realized we were lost. We took the next road to the left just to turn around and go back towards Carpentersville. As we came to a stop just off the road, before we started to back up onto the main road, a creature about as tall as the Ford van we were in started to cross the side of the road from our left to right, about 20 feet in front of the van. It had a long stride, stood upright, was covered with dark brownish to light black straight hair, about 6 to maybe 10 inches long in some spots. It was swinging its arms that looked like they were too long for its torso. Its head was turned to its right and was almost looking straight at us as it crossed and as we were backing to get out of there. Its face was also covered with the same type of hair but shorter, and not so much around the eyes and nose and mouth. It had no muzzle or snout like a chimp would have, just a flatter face. As we were backing onto the main road, I was looking to my right, and we began to pull away. I thought I saw it coming back towards the van, like it had changed directions and it was going to chase the van, This scared me even more than I already was, and my friend was no different. Really scared. It looked so powerful, like it could have torn the doors off with no trouble whatsoever. We just kind of looked at each other for a few seconds as we drove out of there, saying over and over, "What the hell was that? What the hell was that?" Needless to say, no one believed us, and I couldn't blame them either, because if someone had come to me and told me that same story as I told you, I wouldn't believe them either, except for one thing. I was there, and I know what I saw, just not what it was that I saw. I was taking a bike ride along the river in '67 in August. I was very tired, so I sat down on this fallen log and was just watching the river peacefully. Across the river, in the dark shadows of the forest, a shadowy figure emerged. I watched it closely while it was splashing in the water, like it was looking for fresh fish, clams, or even crayfish. It scared me because it was covered with a thick coat of hair, just like an ape. It resembled a cross between an ape and a caveman. As I watched it through the ragweed and cattails, which hid me, I cleared my throat and coughed. It looked all around and seemed to be agitated. I kept sitting on the log because I lost sight of the creature. All of a sudden, 3 huge rocks were tossed from the river toward me. They were the size of throw pillows. Moved out with my bike around the cattail behind and saw it face to face. I yelled, "Wow!" It was moving into the cattails, for it crossed the river without a sound. Upon seeing me, it picked up more rocks and hurled them at me. It was muscular, black-brown in color, with mud on its face and very wrinkled skin. It had bulging eyes and a pushed-in nose. As I ran as fast as I could along the game trail along the river. As I ran, I heard a howl that sounded like an air raid siren. As I ran, I heard screaming and saw shadowy figures on the other side of the river moving. More Bigfoots? I got to the parking lot on East River Road and left. I had an encounter with a Sasquatch that we called the Big Muddy Monster at a pond in Illinois called A41. Well, guess what? I was just watching TV, and they just ran a story about the same monster that I had encountered while I was going to Southern Illinois University in Illinois. Carbondale, to be exact. I was the bartender at Midland Inn. This thing was in the wooded area behind where I was fishing. I kept hearing the brush breaking behind me, but thought it was squirrels or deer, or even turkey. Then it began breaking whole trees, snapping them like they were twigs. I started getting very scared as the area I was fishing was miles from my truck or any road. You had to trek in. Then, a huge chunk of rock splashed into the water in front of me. Then another. I turned around, and it was standing there, looking very pissed off that I was there. It immediately let out a scream. I can still imitate this scream. It starts out as a high-pitched siren-type scream that makes every hair on your body stand up. Then it gets higher-pitched and is so loud you can't believe what is happening. With one step, this thing could have reached out and twisted my head right off my shoulders. I knew I could not outrun it, so I just froze. I could not believe what was happening or what I was seeing. This thing was 5 feet wide at the shoulders. I was on the lowest side of the hill, so I got a real good look and estimate on height, but I'm going to say it was at least 7 feet. Nothing but pure muscle, athletic bodybuilder outlined upper torso. A couple of seconds later, after it screamed, I was trying to think of an escape and turned away from it. It retreated back into the woods so fast that I lost sight of it against the wooded background almost immediately. I grabbed whatever gear I could and started running back down the trail as fast as I could. I don't know what I left there or what I took with me. I ran as far as I could until all I could do was fast jog all the way back to the car. I was playing rugby at the time, and was in pretty good physical shape. The whole time I was running, I was thinking that it could have overtook me at any time. But there is more to this story. I had been fishing for bass with a large shiner minnows for a couple of hours. I was hearing something behind me in the brush. I kept fishing. Something was stealing my bait off the hook, time after time, but I could never hook anything. A fat blackwater moccasin surfed around the bank, so I switched hooks to a number 5 treble hook and snagged it. When I set it down on the bank and beat its head in with a stick, that's when all hell broke loose. To me, it seemed that the creature was watching me the whole time I was fishing. After I killed the water snake and wrapped it around a branch, I pinned it to a tree. Right then is when the huge rocks hit the water. Trees began snapping, and I turned around to scream. This is a true story. I fished this small lake several times before this happened, but have never returned. My memory will never forget this spot on the lake, the snake, the scream, the creature. It has been over 20 years. Story has always been told the same. This happened to me back when I was 17. I went on a hike with my friend, about 4.5 miles down a dirt road, near the very end where there is a large undeveloped cul-de-sac. My friend jolts suddenly and starts panicking, saying, "What is that?" I kept telling him, "You're just tripping out." He kept trying to stop me and would whisper to me that there's something watching us. I told him to stop, thinking he was just trying to spook me, but he was really getting freaked out. This friend of mine is a big tough guy that's not really afraid of nothing. So it was strange, but I found it more annoying at the time than anything else, to be honest with you. After walking for about 10 minutes longer, I heard huge branches crashing and breaking near us. That's when I started to become frightened, and we decided to turn back. While walking back, I could tell that something was following us. We were both terrified. Suddenly, after a minute of calm, this creature leapt out behind us about 50 feet away and stared us down. We both took off running back down this road that led up to where there's a turn in the road. This massive 8-foot-tall wolf monstrosity just came out of nowhere. It didn't chase us, but me and my friend kept looking back to make sure that it wasn't following or coming after us. It just watched us. It looked like a werewolf right out of a movie. It was tall and very dark in color. It had long hair, long ears, and a long snout. I don't remember seeing any eyes or teeth or any of that stuff. I was so scared that I probably blurred a lot of that out anyway. We made it back up the road, and my one friend had urinated all over himself. It was funny in a way, but we were so scared that neither of us were laughing. He never talked about that day ever again, and I don't think we told anybody else. Who would believe us anyway? I was alone in the woods with my dog one day, just listening to Spotify, admiring the beauty in the trees. I and my dog decided to go have a look around for any cool pine cones or even arrowheads. You never know what you can find when you're out in the woods alone. My favorite is finding bones of animals, skulls, ribs, anything I can collect. I was in this huge backlot area to this large apartment complex that stretches way out, and there's a segment of woods, a very large segment that goes on and on. For how long, I'm not sure. I was walking around this back lot and was about to head down further to look at more cool stuff when I began to hear sticks breaking in the tree line down further from me, about 30 feet away. I turned around and looked in the direction that the sound was coming from, and then I saw some huge branches and brush moving. I could clearly see something really big was behind the tree and in the brush next to the tree moving it. The grass and weeds that were right beside the tree line were also shaking violently, as if something was rattling around in them. It freaked me out, honestly, so I decided at the time to hastily head back the way I came, out of there, quickly. I'm walking back, and the rattling and rustling is going crazy in the bushes, and my dog is now terrified and was whimpering. As I'm walking quickly back, I'm looking down, and I make a very unnerving discovery. I did indeed find tracks. Since I did not come in this way, I never saw them originally. 2 sets of tracks. Both very large tracks that I found were much farther apart than the first set, and were only about 20 feet apart in total. The tracks were huge canine tracks, and they switched back and forth from 4 tracks to 2, meaning that they were walking bipedally for at least half the time that they appeared on the ground. Both sets of the tracks were like this, and they both led directly to where I was hearing the shaking, and they led right in that direction of trees. I'm not about to get eaten by a large ravenous wolf. No thanks. I went hiking out in Southern California last summer, and I saw this thing that looked like some kind of wolf or big German shepherd. I never saw one before, but I hear them sometimes around here. I have heard people refer to them as wolf head men because they have this wolf-like head. I don't know if that's actually what they're called, but my family and friends call them that. Most of my family knows about them and has seen them tons of times. In fact, I even heard some howling just before sunset a few weeks back near a cabin that I frequently visit with some friends. I've heard plenty more howling since then though. They seem like they're all over the area I live in. I try to stay out of specific wooded areas around me and hear as much as I can, but I always feel like they're around me. Like maybe there's a large pack of them. I hear them at night sometimes, howling really loud. It reminds me of wolf howls that you hear in the woods, except these howls sounded much deeper and louder. You can tell the volume alone that it came from a bigger animal. Much larger lungs, guttural, a much deeper growl. They are very disturbing howls. I fear it will show itself more and more the longer it hangs around in the area. They get braver, like most animals do. Take a cougar, for example. They hunt until all the food is gone. Then, they come into contact with humans in search of more, and they get brave. Then, they start attacking people. Anyway, I come from a small town where everybody knows each other, so my reputation is a big deal. I don't think I'm ready to publicly speak out about it. Even my family keeps it incognito, but they're bad in this area. People think I'm crazy, but I'm not. I know I'm not crazy. I do know there is something strange in the woods, and I'm not going to be afraid of it. If I'm just going to avoid going to certain spots in the woods where these things live, I certainly don't want it to run into such creatures being out there, and you can't tell me that they're not around. In fact, one time my friend was telling me about how he saw one of these things walking up near his place just outside of Santa Barbara, up in the hills. He took me to his house. It was a newer house that he had just bought, and the spot where he saw this thing, about a week after he originally saw it. I don't know if he's told anybody else about this, but I believe him. He told me when he saw this thing, walking up on his property, he went out to see if he could track it down. He probably could track it maybe 50 feet up a steep rocky hill, but then he heard this loud howl, and a smell accompanied it by rotting meat. He thought it might have been an overly large coyote or dog, but when he got closer, the tracks turned and walked off into the forest bipedally, where he couldn't track it anymore. I don't know if it was the right call for him to try and track it down, but maybe he was curious. I thought he was crazy for it and should have stayed away, in case it was close by. When he described the howl to me that he had heard, it kind of wigged me out because it was the same howl that I had heard, down to the T of the description of it. He talked about how loud and ear-shattering it sounded. a lot of people stay pretty hush-hush about this kind of thing. They might be scared as of what they hear, but they're more terrified of what they don't know is going on. The area in which I live and he lives isn't far apart, but it's pretty densely populated around here. But I seriously doubt that my family and friends are the only ones around here hearing these things, these howls, these noises, and seeing these things. We have to do something quickly before these things start coming out into the public. There's an area beyond my house that has a ton of old deer stands. I've never seen anybody hunt back there, ever. It's got an eerie feel to it. Every time I've ever wandered back there, I get the creeps, and I just imagine a big predator walking around back there. People being afraid to go out at night back there because they're gonna get snatched. Maybe that's just my inner horror movie talking. Well, originally, until my thoughts became a literal nightmare. I used to think I was just overly afraid because I had watched too many horror movies. And then, I saw the largest upright walking coyote that I've ever seen. It was massive, and I could see the tops of its ears over its head. It was radiating that horrid yellow glow from its eyes. I honestly thought it was some sort of werewolf or wolfman to me, until I saw it in full view in the open, eating the deer. It's hard to comprehend what it was exactly, but I can tell you that whatever it was looked much larger and angrier than a typical coyote. I think this thing came from the nearby creek, where there are a lot of deer that like to congregate and drink water. Initially, I first saw it when I was back there exploring, thinking about all the creepy Silent Hill-esque things that happen in this part of the woods, with the abandoned stands in them. I heard a bunch of commotion coming from the direction where the creek is. So, I was curious and went a little further to investigate. That's when I saw it for the first time. This massive coyote-looking creature attacking and killing this deer as it was drinking at the creek. I was stunned at what I was seeing. Not even more than a few seconds of staring at this monster, I could hear it making this clicking noise as it was chomping down on this dead deer. It had probably been there for maybe 20 seconds. Then it stopped. I was frozen in complete and utter panic and thought it was going to kill me next. But it slowly looked up at me. I heard it let out this nasty, god-awful growl. I turned and ran as fast as I could to get up out of there. It was almost as if this thing had read my mind and my thoughts. Judging by its expression alone, I just remember thinking, werewolf. It was so tall and intimidating looking. I didn't know what to make of it at first, but then I realized, if I don't leave now, I'm gonna be its next meal. God, it really did resemble a large upright walking coyote. Very shaggy and matted fur. It was so huge, and a gray-white color, but off-white, with a long snout. It was wet too, looking like it just crawled out of the creek and attacked this poor doe. The whole experience has left me freaked out so much that I don't go back there exploring anymore, at least like I used to. Then afterward, I started to really think critically, and maybe there's a reason people don't hunt back there anymore. I don't know. There are many areas with abandoned tree stands, but I can't accurately describe to you the feeling that that part of the woods gives you. It really just makes my skin crawl being back there. And then I go and see that coyote thing, and that just sealed the deal for me. Do I think there's a large werewolf-type creature ravaging the lands back there? Not quite. Do I think there's a large unknown predator that looks and resembles a werewolf back there that I want to avoid completely? Yes. So, this story was just told to me by my boyfriend about a week ago, and to be honest, it gives me chills when I think about it. I'll tell this story from his point of view, so that it makes a little more sense. When I was about 9 or 10, me and a couple of other my kids my age would always go to our school's playground on the weekend, when we found ourselves bored at home. There were 6 of us, 4 boys and 2 girls. One Saturday, We had planned to go to the playground around 6 p.m. It was fall, so it was already pretty dark, but my mother was okay with it since our school was only 2 blocks away from the house. So, I grab my keys and phone and head out. I meet up with the 2 girls and we walk towards the school to meet up with the 3 other boys. We're playing around, doing whatever it is 10-year-olds do, and eventually we separate and play different games with one another. One of the girls I noticed as I was playing was sitting alone on the swings, looking at her phone. I just assumed that she was playing a game or something, so I just went back to playing. About 6 minutes later, she sent a scream so loud it caught the whole group's attention, even though we were separated across the whole playground, and it wasn't a small playground at all. "Guys!" she screamed. We all turned and looked at her, startled. When I looked, I noticed that she's no longer on her phone, but she's looking straight up onto the sky. One of the boys we were with started to run towards her, so we all ran after him. We got to her, and she is still looking up. So, out of curiosity, I look up. I see nothing but a dark sky, clouds, and a couple of stars. We're all confused now. "You guys don't see that?" she asked us. "No, what are you looking at?" I asked. She points up to what I assume was a star in the sky. I'm standing right next to her, and that was all I really can see. At this point, the rest of the kids have went back to play. "Stand right here. Look where I'm pointing," she said. She moves and stands right in the exact spot that she was standing in, and points up, and I align my eyes to look at whatever she's pointing to. That's when I see it, and I felt my heart begin to fall. At just the right angle, I can see a giant silver and black triangular-shaped spaceship. It was hovering over the entire playground. We could all see it clear as day, but none of the other kids could. My eyes were stuck on it for so long that it feels like hours. It made no noise. If it was still, it didn't move at all. Then, all of a sudden it just vanished, like it was never there. That's how the story ends. Me and my boyfriend believe in aliens and such, but when we tried to research what we saw, we couldn't find anything. Has anyone had a similar experience, and what are your thoughts? The following story you're about to hear is 100% true. Parts of this story might sound like it's from a movie, but I assure you, it all happened to this day, and it's still a mystery of what actually happened. It was the last few minutes of class before school ended for spring break. As me and my best friend Josh were waiting for the buses to pull up and take us home, we began talking about what we wanted to do over our spring break trip. We talked all the way home, from playing basketball, working out, to even building our own go-kart out of scraps that his grandfather had in his old beat-down shed in the back. When we finally arrived at our destination, getting ready to step off the bus, our other friend Kimberly stopped us and asked us if we could meet up a little later that night. See, we all lived in the same area, so we decided to meet up around 11 o'clock so our parents would think we were in bed. Later that night, before we snuck out of our houses, we called Kimberly and asked where she wanted to meet at. We all decided to meet up at a little crossroads section about 4 miles out from where we lived. The only problem is it's all simple gravel roads surrounded by thick woods that stretches about 15 miles to the nearest highway. So, naturally, we were a little scared to begin with to walk out there by ourselves in the dead of night in the middle of nowhere. On the way there, me and my friend Josh were talking about the old haunted slave shack that still resigned there since the 1800s, just about a mile to the left where we were meeting up at. As we pressed forward, my friend and I began feeling like we were being watched from a distance. Shrugging it off, we continued down the old creepy road, still talking about the slave shack that we noticed, a shooting star. It zoomed right in the night sky. This is where this night would haunt us forever. We continued down the old gravel road, still talking, when all of a sudden, we see 2 more shooting stars, then another, and another, until it looked like a machine gun was shooting stars from it. We were amazed by what we had just seen. But we finally reached our destination, seeing Kimberly sitting on the patch of grass on the side of the road. We all hugged and just sat there talking about what we were going to do during spring break. Hours have passed, and it's now 3 a.m. in the morning, still sitting and talking. Then, out of nowhere, this unusually large dog approached us. It was very sweet, a very loving kind of dog, not usual for a stray. I decided to get up and stretch my legs while Kimberly and Josh were still petting the dog. Out of the corner of my eyes, I seen this dog in the distance, sitting in a very propped way, as dogs do when they sit. But as I looked and stared at this dog, all I could see was the black shape of his silhouette. All of a sudden, I felt this eerie feeling come upon me, as if something was going to happen. I noticed the ears on this strange dog were so sharp, it looked like if you were to poke it, it would draw blood. A chilling gust of wind blew all around us as this happened. I heard screams coming from behind me, so I ran over to Kimberly and Josh and asked what had happened. They said that the dog they were petting just disappeared over the sheer drop-off on the other side of the road. Now, let me tell you that anybody or anything that fell off that side would have died, but we see nothing. As they kept looking, I kept hearing strange noises coming from where I'd seen that creepy dog. I walked to where I was before, and I ran back over to see what they were screaming about. And sure enough, that creepy dog was still staring at me, and at that moment, I seen the dog's head looked up and then look back at me. In that moment, a very bright beam of light lit the ground only around us. It was so bright that after the light flashed, I couldn't see anything for about a minute. Kimberly and Josh jumped up as I turned to them and asked, please tell me I wasn't the only one to see that. We all agreed it was not our imagination and decided to huddle together and to try to figure out what had just happened. As we stood there, contemplating on what we should do, we all began to feel that feeling again, as if we were being watched. Me and Josh began talking about how we were going to protect Kimberly if anything was to happen. Then, out of nowhere, we turned to Kim to talk to her and noticed that she was pale as a ghost, standing there, lifeless. I was facing the other direction from both of them, and then Josh began to get pale. I asked what's wrong with them, and Josh slowly and quietly said, dude, there is something standing about 40 feet behind you. As he told me that, chills ran down my spine through my legs, and I got weak. When I slowly turned around, I was scared of what I'd see. I was mortified. Standing there in the bush, about 40 feet away from me, was a tall black figure, at least 7 to 8 feet tall, and was walking towards us with a limp-like movement. The complete panic and fear blazed through our bodies. I turned to both of them and said, start walking home now and don't look back. We started our 4-mile-long frightening journey back home. Along the way there, I kept telling Josh to stay behind Kimberly and calm her down from crying with a panic. I was behind Josh because I wanted to make sure they both were in front of me, so that if anything were to happen, they could get away and get help. As we were almost home, we continued to power walk through the thick woods, down the gravel road, and I started to feel that feeling again, as if someone or something was behind me. I didn't dare look back, afraid of what I might see. But I continued anyway, only to hear gravel being swept away, as if somebody was running at us from behind, chasing. I told them to start running as fast as possible, since we could see Josh's house in the distance. Finally, we were able to get off the gravel road and make it up the hill to his window. We quickly opened it and climbed in, relieved that whatever we just experienced was finally over. All that night, none of us slept a single minute, still wondering and frightened of what happened. We decided to let Kim sleep in the closet of his bedroom till morning, then would walk her home. Weeks went by as it was time for school again. Keeping our story a secret, we told no one of our encounter, fearing what people would think. During lunch, we agreed to start telling people what happened, And to our surprise, some people said that they've had experiences at the small crossroads section also. Some people say it was some sort of alien encounter. Some say it was the Grim Reaper searching for the old slave that haunted the shack nearby and would take anybody it could get. To this day, 14 years ago, we still have no answers as to what or who was with us that frightening spring night. But it has haunted us to this day, and we'll never forget our encounter with the supernatural. Was it an alien, or could it have been the Grim Reaper, as people suggested? I guess I'll never know. Maybe one day I'll find out again, but then again, I don't ever want to know. I'll never go back to that awful place.